The first time Miriam Ellersby saw her own name beneath a black seal, half the room was applauding as though she had died beautifully. London had gathered that afternoon in Lady Drusilla Larkwell's subscription hall in Mayfair, where gilt chairs stood in disciplined rows, where tall windows admitted a pale spring light, and where every generous impulse seemed to require witnesses. A painted banner above the long table read Relief for Convalescent Soldiers' Widows, and beneath it sat 3 silver inkstands, 2 locked arms boxes, and a stack of cream cards upon which society would purchase the comfort of feeling righteous. Miriam had arrived as Lord Phineas Larkwell's betrothed. She had worn the quiet pearl earrings his mother approved of, carried the small reticule Aunt Mercy had mended twice, and told herself that by the end of the afternoon, Lady Drusilla would at last announce a wedding date instead of postponing it behind smiles. For 6 months, Miriam had accepted delays. For 6 months, she had listened to Phineas speak of timing, settlements, family convenience, and the delicacy of public expectation. She had not called it cowardice because she had once loved him, and love, when it was dying, often asked for the courtesy of another name. He stood now near the subscription table in a coat of faultless dark blue, one hand resting lightly on the chair beside Lady Hester Larkwell. Hester wore pale rose silk and the double strand of seed pearls Miriam had been told would be reset for her own wedding breakfast. That small discovery did not break Miriam. It merely made the room sharper. Every candle flame seemed to hold still. Lady Drusilla rose with a smile that had governed drawing rooms for 30 years. "My friends," she said, "there are charitable gifts made from the purse, and there are gifts made from the heart." A soft murmur passed among the patronesses. Miriam felt Phineas's fingers close over the back of her chair, not affectionately, but as though he wished to keep the chair from moving. "This afternoon," Lady Drusilla continued, "our dear Miss Ellersby has consented to a most extraordinary act of Christian devotion." Miriam looked up. Phineas did not look at her. That was the first true answer he had given her all day. Lady Drusilla lifted a cream card from the table. A black wax seal caught the light like a closed eye. "In recognition of His Grace the Duke of Brackenholt's generous interest in our Widows' Fund, and in pity for his much afflicted condition, Miss Miriam Ellersby offers herself freely to His Grace as companion, comfort, and wife." The last word moved through the hall before Miriam understood it. Wife. Not Phineas's wife, not the future Lady Larkwell. Wife to the man whispered of in carriage steps and opera corridors as the rotting Duke of Brackenholt, the recluse of Dunmarsh Hall, the nobleman whose voice had been eaten by fever and whose house, according to cruel women with pretty fans, smelled of damp stone and dying roses. Applause began politely, then grew. It was not joy, it was relief. They were relieved the unpleasant sacrifice belonged to someone else. Miriam rose so suddenly her chair scraped the floor. The sound was small, but it cut through the clapping. "I beg your pardon," she said. Her voice did not shake. She was grateful for that, because nothing else in her felt steady. There has been some mistake. Phineas turned then, handsome face arranged in sorrow. "Miriam, don't make this harder than it must be." The use of her Christian name before the room struck her more sharply than if he had shouted. Lady Hester lowered her eyes, but the smile at the corner of her mouth remained. Lady Drusilla held the pledge card higher. "My dear child, modesty honors you, but this is no hour for confusion." "I am not confused," Miriam said. "I did not consent to this." The applause thinned into whispers. A dowager in violet leaned toward another. Somewhere behind Miriam, a gentleman gave a low, disbelieving laugh. Phineas stepped close enough that only those nearest could see his hand descend beneath the edge of the subscription table. He caught Miriam's gloved wrist. "Don't," he murmured. "You'll ruin yourself. You have already attempted it. It's arranged. Be sensible." "With whom?" His grip tightened. Miriam's other hand moved by instinct to the reticule hanging from her wrist. Inside lay her mother's small enamel needle case, painted with forget-me-nots so faded that the blue flowers had become almost grey. Miriam had carried it since she was 16. She did not sew in public unless forced to do so. But the little case had always steadied her. It was proof that something delicate could be useful. Her fingers closed around it now, seeking the familiar hinge, the tiny weight of the needle within. Phineas felt the movement. Under cover of the tablecloth, he pressed her hand hard enough that the hinge gave a faint, heart-breaking crack. Miriam's breath stopped. Not because of pain, because the sound was private, and he had done it while the room called him honorable. "Smile," Phineas whispered. "The Duke's name will protect you better than mine ever could." Miriam looked at him then, truly looked. The man before her was not torn by duty. He was relieved. He had found a way to abandon her and be praised for it. "Who wrote my consent before I gave it?" she asked. The question carried farther than she intended. Lady Drusilla's expression tightened. Hester's fan stopped mid-air. Phineas released Miriam's wrist at once, but the damage had been done. Her hand remained around the cracked needle case. She would feel that sound for the rest of her life. "Miss Ellersby," Lady Drusilla said, still smiling. "Young ladies often underestimate the honor of being useful, and older ladies often overestimate their right to decide how useful we shall be." A sharper silence fell. It did not last. The doors at the rear of the hall opened, not widely, not with theatrical force. They opened just enough to admit a tall man in a dark coat, a black cane in his right hand, and a stillness that altered the temperature of the room. Arthur Valehurst, Duke of Brackenholt, did not look like a corpse, though society had tried very hard to bury him in rumor. He was pale, certainly, and leaner than fashion preferred. A white scar disappeared beneath his collar at the side of his throat, and when he stepped forward, his left hand remained close to his body, stiff and guarded. But nothing in him seemed rotten. His eyes were clear grey, severe and awake. They moved first to the pledge card in Lady Drusilla's hand, then to Phineas, then to Miriam's wrist, where the skin above her glove still bore the memory of pressure. Last and most strangely, he looked at the reticule in her hand, where the cracked forget-me-not case pressed a small hard line against the silk. Miriam felt seen in a way that was almost indecent. Not admired, not pitied. Seen, Lady Drusilla recovered first. "Your Grace, we were just honoring your noble need." Arthur's gaze did not leave Miriam. When he spoke, his voice was low, roughened, as if each word had passed over old injury. Yet the room leaned in to hear it. "My need, Lady Larkwell, has never required the theft of a woman's name." Phineas bowed too quickly. "Your Grace misunderstands. Miss Ellersby has been moved by Christian compassion. She is overwhelmed, naturally, but she knows the arrangement is for the best." Arthur came down the center aisle. People shifted from his path with the old instinct of rank. A duke did not need to raise his voice to command a room. He only needed to arrive without asking permission. "Does she?" he asked. "Of course," Phineas said. "It's a delicate matter." Then delicacy has made a coward of plain speech. A faint color rose along Phineas's cheekbones. Lady Hester's fan began moving again, faster now, Arthur stopped before the subscription table. Close by, Miriam saw the effort it cost him to stand so straight. One knuckle whitened against the cane. His throat moved once before he turned to Lady Drusilla. "Show me the card. Your Grace, this is hardly necessary before so many friends." "If I am named upon it, it is necessary." She hesitated. That hesitation told Miriam more than any confession. Arthur extended his hand. Lady Drusilla surrendered the pledge card. The black seal lay against the cream paper, glossy and arrogant. Miriam saw her own name beneath it, written in a careful imitation of her hand. For one dizzy second, she imagined London believing that the loops and lines were hers. She imagined years of being told she had chosen this. She imagined Phineas marrying Hester beneath flowers, paid for by pity. Arthur studied the seal, and something colder than anger crossed his face. "This is not mine." The room stirred. "Your Grace," Lady Drusilla said, "the seal is not Brackenholt's." He lifted the card slightly, not for drama, but for evidence. No woman's Christian duty begins with a forged signature. The words landed like a dropped glass. Miriam's knees threatened to weaken. But she would not give Phineas the satisfaction of seeing her sink. She straightened. Arthur noticed. His eyes met hers, and for the briefest moment the hall, the whispers, the black seal, and Phineas's betrayal seemed to recede. There was no tenderness yet. There could not be. There was only recognition, sharp and grave. He had not come to claim a sacrifice. He had come upon a crime dressed as benevolence. Lady Drusilla's smile returned, thinner. "Surely Miss Ellersby can clarify." "My dear, you did understand the honor being offered." Miriam looked at the card, then at the man she had meant to marry. Phineas's mouth formed a warning she no longer cared to read. Her fingers tightened around the cracked needle case. A delicate thing could be useful. A quiet woman could still make a room listen. Arthur turned slightly, not blocking her, not speaking over her, not claiming her answer as his own. Before all of Mayfair's charitable witnesses, he asked, "Miss Ellersby, did you give permission for your name to be placed beneath that seal?" Miriam drew one breath, felt the broken hinge beneath her thumb, and lifted her chin. "No," Miriam said. The word was not loud, yet it seemed to travel farther than the applause had done. It struck the gilt walls, the subscription table, the locked alms boxes, and every face that had been eager to mistake our silence for virtue. "I gave no permission. I wrote no such pledge. I consented to no such arrangement." For one suspended moment, nobody moved. Then Mayfair remembered how to breathe. Fans snapped open. Silk rustled. A gentleman coughed into his glove as though the scandal had entered his throat. Lady Drusilla's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, but her smile did not quite break. Phineas made a soft sound, almost a laugh, and stepped forward with the wounded dignity of a man who had practiced appearing misunderstood. "Miriam, you're distressed," he said. "Everyone can see it. It's natural. No one blames you." Arthur Valehurst did not look away from her. I heard her clearly. "Your Grace," Phineas replied, bowing just enough to acknowledge rank without surrendering pride. "You arrived in the middle of a delicate family matter. Miss Ellersby has always possessed a tender heart. When the notion was first raised, she was moved, deeply moved, but now the public nature of the thing has overwhelmed her." Miriam almost admired the smoothness of it. Almost. A lie told badly could be rejected. A lie told gently tried to make the truth look ill-bred. "Do not speak of my heart as though it were a room you have furnished," she said. A few women inhaled. Hester's fan faltered again. Arthur's mouth did not soften, but something in his gaze sharpened with unmistakable approval. Lady Drusilla lifted one hand, commanding the hall as if it were still hers to command. "This cannot be settled in raised voices." "No voice has been raised," Arthur said. His roughened tone made the sentence quieter and more dangerous than anger. "Only a woman's consent has been." Lady Drusilla coloured. "Your Grace, I have managed charitable boards since before Miss Ellersby left the schoolroom. These matters require tact. Force requires evidence." He held the pledge card by its edges and examined the black wax again. "This is Larkwell mourning wax. I have seen it on your late husband's correspondence. Brackenholt uses a plain impressed hawthorn, never black wax, and never upon a lady's private pledge." The hall shifted. The first whisper had been scandal. This one was calculation. Miriam saw the change move across faces. No one was yet on her side. They were only less certain which side would cost them more. Lady Drusilla's smile became narrow enough to cut thread. "A committee clerk may have used what was at hand. That hardly proves ill intent." "It proves my name was used without my authority," Arthur said. "And Miss Ellersby has said hers was used without consent." Phineas tried another tone, softer, more intimate, crueler for pretending care. "Miriam, don't let pride destroy what little safety remains to you. If you deny this before everyone, what future do you imagine? You cannot return to our engagement after insulting my mother and his Grace in the same breath." Miriam looked at him. His handsome face had once seemed a promise of ease after years of careful economies and quiet dependence. Now she saw only the smooth surface of a door closing. "Then I shall not return to it," she said. His eyes changed. Just for an instant, fear showed. Not heartbreak. Fear. Arthur noticed it too. Miriam knew because his gaze flicked from Phineas's face to the card, then back again. "There is a retiring room beyond the west screen," Arthur said. "The door will remain open, Mrs. Ellersby. If you are present, propriety will be satisfied. Miss Ellersby has been made the subject of a public pledge. She may inspect it without being stared at like an exhibit." Aunt Mercy had been seated in the second row, pale but upright, her widow's cap trembling with the effort not to weep. At Arthur's words, she rose at once. "I will attend my niece." Lady Drusilla opened her mouth. Arthur turned his head slightly. He did not threaten. He did not need to. "You may send for your clerk," he said, "and for every person who touched this card before it reached that table." The colour left Lady Drusilla's cheeks. "That will not be necessary." "It will." The west retiring room was separated from the hall by a carved screen, and a pair of doors opened wide enough to keep the meeting respectable. Miriam entered first because Arthur stepped aside to let her do so. That small courtesy nearly undid her. Phineas had pulled her beneath a tablecloth. Arthur would not even cross a threshold before her. Inside, a fire burned too hot for spring, and the mantel was crowded with porcelain shepherdesses nobody had ever loved. Aunt Mercy came to Miriam's side and touched her elbow. "My dear, I am well," Miriam said, because she could not yet afford to be otherwise. Arthur placed the pledge card upon a small writing table. "Miss Ellersby, will you look at this?" Miriam approached. The forged handwriting waited for her, graceful and obscene. Miss Miriam Ellersby. Whoever had copied her hand had known the slight rightward lean of her capital M, and the way she left more space before her surname than most people did. But the final Y in Ellersby was wrong. Miriam always drew the tail inward. This hand flicked it outward, prettily, falsely, like a curtsy. She reached toward the card at the same moment Arthur did, both intending to turn it toward the light. Their fingers touched, only briefly. His skin was cool, where his glove did not quite cover the stiffened knuckle of his left hand. Miriam stilled. So did he. There was no impropriety in so slight a contact, no heat that anyone could name, yet the silence between them altered. It was not the silence of the hall, hungry and cruel. It was careful. He withdrew first, not as if recoiling, but as if giving her the whole right to proceed. "Forgive me," he said. "You needn't apologize," Miriam replied, then heard the unguarded softness of her own voice and lowered her eyes to the card. "This is near my hand, but it is not mine." "How near?" "Near enough to fool someone who wanted to be fooled." Aunt Mercy made a wounded sound. Miriam did not look back. If she saw her aunt's face, she might lose the hard, clean anger holding her upright. Arthur leaned upon his cane, but his attention remained perfectly steady. "Has Lady Drusilla ever received a note from you?" Miriam thought. Yes. 3 months ago, after she placed Aunt Mercy upon the widow's relief list. "I wrote a note of thanks. In your usual hand, of course." "Did it include your full name?" "Yes." Phineas appeared beyond the open doorway, hovering where the hall could see him and the room could hear him. "This is becoming absurd. Are we to pretend a note of gratitude is evidence of conspiracy?" Arthur did not turn. "We are to pretend nothing." Miriam looked again at the card. There, just above the black seal, was a tiny puncture through the paper. Then another near the margin. Not ink, not damage from folding, pinpricks. "There are holes," she said. Arthur's eyes dropped to the card. "Where?" she pointed, careful not to touch his hand this time, though she was aware of it beside hers. "One here, another here," as if it had been pinned to something. Aunt Mercy bent closer. "Could it have been fixed to the subscription board?" "Perhaps," Miriam said. "But why pin a private pledge before presenting it?" Arthur's expression grew colder. "Because it may not have begun as a private pledge." Phineas laughed from the doorway. "Your Grace sees intrigue in stationery, and you see consent where a lady has denied it." Phineas flushed. Lady Drusilla's voice floated from the hall, composed but strained. "Miss Ellersby must consider the consequences of this performance. Her aunt's pension depends upon the continued goodwill of this committee. None of us wish hardship upon Mrs. Ellersby." Aunt Mercy's hand tightened around the back of a chair. There it was, not even hidden. Miriam felt a familiar old fear open beneath her ribs. Aunt Mercy's small pension paid for coal, medicine, rent arrears, and the dignity of not begging relations who had long ago become strangers. Lady Drusilla had not raised a hand. She had only touched the weakest beam in Miriam's life and smiled at the creak. Arthur heard it. His face changed. "Lady Drusilla," he said, turning now, "my endowment to this charity is suspended. From this hour until every account, pledge, and pension list has been examined by my solicitor." A sound passed through the hall like wind across dry leaves. Lady Drusilla stepped into view. "You would punish widows because a young lady regrets a generous impulse. I would protect widows from a committee that uses their hunger to silence inconvenient women." His voice roughened on the last words, and Miriam saw the cost of speaking so much. His throat tightened. One gloved finger pressed briefly against the head of his cane. Society called that decay. Miriam saw pain being mastered. She saw discipline. She saw a man who had learned to ration his own voice and spent it anyway. "Your Grace," she said quietly. He looked at her. "I do not wish my aunt harmed for my sake." "Nor do I." "Then do not let them say I cost those women their bread." For the first time, something like gentleness entered his eyes. It did not soften him. It steadied him. "They may say what they like. We shall concern ourselves with what is true." Phineas's mouth twisted. a noble sentiment, but truth will not restore Miss Ellersby's prospects. Miriam turned to him. Once she had feared losing him would make her pitiable. Now she understood that being kept by him would have been worse. My prospects, my lord, cannot be poorer than a future built by men who require forged consent. The silence that followed was different from the first. Less hungry, more awake. Arthur picked up the pledge card and held it not as a claim, but as evidence. This will go to my solicitor. Lady Drusilla moved forward. That card belongs to the committee. It bears my name falsely and Miss Ellersby's falsely. If you object, send your clerk to Mr. Osric Bell tomorrow morning and object in writing. No one moved to stop him. Rank had its own language, and every person in the hall understood it. Miriam slipped her cracked needle case back into her reticule, but Arthur's gaze caught the small motion. He had seen it before. He had seen too much, perhaps, yet when he spoke again, it was not with pity. Miss Ellersby, I cannot undo what was done in this room. His voice was lower now, meant for her, though the doorway remained open. But I can state before those who witnessed it that I did not seek you as payment, charity, service, or sacrifice. Her throat tightened. Thank you, Your Grace. Do not thank me for refusing theft. Their eyes held for one careful second. It was not romance, not yet. It was the first clean stone laid across a flooded road. Behind them, Lady Drusilla whispered to Hester, and Hester's gaze flicked toward Miriam's reticule with quick, bright malice. Miriam did not see it, but Arthur did. His hand closed around the pledge card. The black seal cracked a little more beneath the pressure of his fingers, and he looked toward the hall as if all of Mayfair had just become a question he intended to answer. By 10 o'clock the next morning, a folded gossip sheet lay upon Miriam Ellersby's breakfast plate, like a dead white moth. Aunt Mercy had tried to remove it before Miriam entered the little parlor, but the paper had already left its stain upon the room. Bloomsbury did not glitter like Mayfair. The windows rattled when carts passed below. The carpet had been turned twice to hide its worn path, and the tea service was silver plate, polished so faithfully it almost seemed honest. Miriam preferred it. Nothing in these rooms pretended to be more generous than it was. She lifted the sheet before Aunt Mercy could object. The headline was not large, but cruelty did not require large type. The rotting Duke accepts his charity bride. Beneath it, some anonymous pen had written of feminine devotion, shattered engagements, noble pity, and the touching spectacle of Miss Miriam Ellersby sacrificing youthful prospects to comfort an afflicted peer. It did not mention that she had said no. It did not mention the forged hand. It did not mention the black Larkwell's seal. My dear Aunt Mercy said, you needn't read any more. Miriam folded the paper with care. If London means to invent me, I ought to know what materials it is using. Aunt Mercy's eyes filled, though she turned toward the teapot to hide it. I should never have allowed you to attend yesterday. Lady Drusilla has always smiled as if she were measuring coffins. You could not have known. I knew enough to dislike her. That is not evidence, Aunt. At my age, dislike is often evidence before gentlemen discover the paperwork. Miriam almost smiled. It hurt too much to last. She had not slept. All night the words had returned in fragments. Companion, comfort, wife, sacrifice. Phineas's fingers crushing her reticule. The faint crack of her mother's needle case. The Duke of Brackenholt's rough voice saying that no woman's Christian duty began with a forged signature. She had placed the little case beside her bed and opened it before dawn. The hinge still worked, though unevenly. The forget-me-nots on the enamel lid seemed dimmer in morning light, but the needle within remained straight. That had steadied her more than prayer. The knock came at 10:30. Not the hurried rap of a tradesman, nor the uncertain tapping of a caller embarrassed by the neighborhood. It was measured. Aunt Mercy looked at Miriam. Miriam looked toward the mirror above the mantel, where her own face appeared pale but composed. "If that is Lord Phineas, I am not at home." The maid opened the door, then reappeared with eyes wide enough to turn formality into panic. His Grace, the Duke of Brackenholt, Ma'am and a Mr. Osric Bell. Aunt Mercy rose so quickly that her chair scraped. Miriam stood more slowly. "Show them in." Arthur Valehurst entered with his hat in one hand and a black cane in the other. Morning made him look less severe and more tired. The scar at his throat showed above his collar. When he inclined his head, a pale seam society had made into a whole mythology. Beside him stood Mr. Osric Bell, a compact man of middle years with observant eyes, a leather document case, and the expression of a solicitor who had learned that families were often more dangerous than strangers. Arthur bowed first to Aunt Mercy, then to Miriam. "Mrs. Ellersby, Miss Ellersby, I apologize for calling so early." His voice was rougher than it had been yesterday, as though the hall had taken payment from him. Miriam noticed and wished she had not, because noticing was the beginning of concern. "Given the paper on my breakfast plate, Your Grace, early seems merciful." Arthur's gaze flicked to the folded sheet. "I saw it. Did you purchase every copy?" Mr. Bell's mouth twitched. Arthur did not smile. "No, that would only teach the printer to sell dearer lies." Aunt Mercy gestured them to chairs. The door remained open, and the maid was instructed to leave the tea tray within sight of the passage. Propriety, even in disaster, required witnesses. Arthur waited until Miriam sat before lowering himself into the chair opposite. He did not conceal the small stiffness of the movement, though he did not invite sympathy for it either. Mr. Bell placed his case upon the table and removed the black-sealed pledge card, now wrapped in a sheet of clean paper. Miriam saw the false signature and felt again the strange violation of her own name looking back at her. "I have examined the card," Mr. Bell said, "not fully, but enough to say that the signature bears signs of tracing. The pressure is uneven. The ink hesitates at curves where a natural hand would not." "Can that be proved?" Miriam asked. "With comparison samples, yes. But proof before a court and proof before a drawing room are different creatures. We must prepare for both." Arthur leaned forward slightly. "Before Mr. Bell discusses remedies, I owe you clarity. Yesterday my name was used to injure you. I will pursue that, whether you wish any connection with me or not." Miriam absorbed the phrasing, "whether you wish any connection with me or not." It was the first sentence since yesterday that did not place a decision inside her mouth. "What remedies?" Aunt Mercy asked, hands folded tightly. Mr. Bell opened a page of notes. "The first is a public denial. His Grace may publish a statement that no offer, arrangement, or understanding existed between Brackenholt and Miss Ellersby. It would be direct. It would also leave Miss Ellersby exposed to the Larkwell version that she invented the matter after being rejected." Aunt Mercy flinched. Miriam did not. "The second," Arthur said, "I pursue Larkwell alone. Forgery, misuse of my seal by implication, misuse of charitable funds if the accounts prove false. You withdraw. I do not speak your name again, except to clear it." That should have sounded safest. It did not. In that version, Miriam became the absent, injured party, useful as motive, silent as evidence. "And the third?" she asked. Arthur's grey eyes met hers. "A temporary formal engagement, written under your terms. It gives society a structure it understands, while Mr. Bell examines the charity books and the origin of the pledge. It prevents Larkwell from painting you as discarded. It also prevents anyone from claiming, "I have compromised you by consulting with you." Aunt Mercy whispered. "An engagement?" "Temporary," Arthur said. "Protective only if Miss Ellersby chooses it. Dissolved the moment she wishes, or made public as false if that better serves her. I will not have yesterday's theft corrected by another theft." Miriam looked at the pledge card, then at the gossip sheet, then at Aunt Mercy, whose pension Lady Drusilla had threatened as easily as one might remove a dead flower from a vase. "If I agree, people will say I wanted this," Arthur answered at once. "They already do." The honesty struck cleanly. She preferred it to comfort. "And if I refuse, they will say you were refused. So my choices are scandal in 3 costumes." Mr. Bell inclined his head. "That is unfortunately how society often dresses truth, Miss Ellersby." Miriam rose and walked to the small writing desk by the window. Beneath its sloped lid lay her mother's needle case, where she had placed it after breakfast. She took it up, pressed the cracked hinge until it opened, and removed the tiny needle tucked inside. It was absurd, perhaps, to use a sewing needle to steady paper, but she had done it for years when drafts curled beneath her hand. Her mother had once said that a woman who could hold cloth steady could hold a line steady. Miriam turned back. "If there is an engagement, it will not be announced as rescue." Arthur's attention deepened. "No, there will be no private claim upon me. No, no visits without Aunt Mercy or another proper chaperone. Of course. No statement will be published in my name unless I have read it first." Mr. Bell's pen began moving. Miriam continued before courage could cool. "I will not be hidden from society to make matters easier. I will not be described as charitable, grateful, tender, redeemed, rescued, or any other word chosen because it is softer than wronged. No decision will be made in my name, not by you, not by Mr. Bell, not by any committee, not even if the decision is meant kindly." Arthur's hand, resting on the cane, tightened once, not in anger, in recognition. "Agreed." Aunt Mercy stared at her as though grief and pride had become the same expression. Miriam sat at the desk. Mr. Bell provided a sheet. She dipped the pen and wrote each condition. In firm black ink, the small needle laid across the top corner to hold the paper flat. The room was very quiet. Outside, Bloomsbury wheels rolled over stones. Inside, Miriam's name returned to her one stroke at a time. When she finished, she signed not with a flourish, but with the inward curve of the final Y, exactly as it should be. Arthur looked at the signature, then at the forged one upon the pledge card. "There," he said softly. "That is a hand one obeys." Miriam closed the needle case, careful of the cracked hinge. "Then I shall expect obedience, Your Grace." For the first time, something almost like amusement touched his eyes. "Then I shall obey your hand, Miss Ellersby." Not their version of it. The words should not have warmed her. They did. Not like flattery, which slid across the surface. This entered more quietly, as if some locked inner room had received air. Mr. Bell cleared his throat with professional mercy. "I will draft the engagement notice narrowly. It will state mutual consent to a temporary understanding while malicious misrepresentations are examined." "No," Miriam said. "Not malicious misrepresentations. That sounds like ink spilled by accident. Say forged pledge." Mr. Bell paused, then wrote it down. Arthur's gaze did not leave her face. "You understand that plain words make enemies quicker. Then let them arrive plainly too." A knock sounded below. The maid went, returned, and handed Aunt Mercy a note with reluctance. Aunt Mercy read it and went pale. From Lord Phineas. Miriam held out her hand. This time no one stopped her. The note was brief. Miriam, do not mistake Brackenholt's attention for salvation. By nightfall society will know you preferred a duke's rank to my affection. Do not force me to say how eagerly you accepted the exchange. Miriam folded the paper once, twice. Her hand was steady now. Arthur's expression had gone cold enough to quiet the room. May I? He asked, extending his hand not for her, but for the note. She considered. Then she gave it to him because she chose to. He read it and passed it to Mr. Bell. Add intimidation to your file. Gladly, said the solicitor. By afternoon, the engagement notice had not yet been written, but London had written its own. Another sheet reached Bloomsbury before the tea cooled, delivered by a boy paid to grin while he did it. The headline was uglier than the first. The rotting Duke accepts his charity bride. This time Miriam did not sit down. She crossed to the window, looked over the grey street, and held the cracked needle case in her palm. Behind her, Arthur's voice sounded low and certain. Now we know they are afraid of your name in your own hand. Miriam turned. Then we shall give them more of it. 2 days later, Miriam Ellersby returned to Mayfair in a gown the colour of quiet rain, and with her mother's cracked forget-me-not needle case inside her reticule. She had chosen the gown because it did not plead for sympathy. It did not invite admiration either. It merely allowed her to enter Lady Avelmere's smaller patroness meeting as a woman who had not been erased by yesterday's papers. And that, Miriam had decided, would have to be enough. Aunt Mercy sat opposite her in the hired carriage, gloved hands folded, eyes fixed upon the passing houses, as if counting respectable windows might keep fear from entering. We can still turn back, she said. His Grace would understand. That is precisely why I cannot turn back, Miriam replied. Because he would. The temporary engagement notice had not yet been published. Mr. Bell had warned that every word must be placed with care, yet gossip required no drafting, no proof, and no conscience. Already, London had transformed Miriam into 3 different women: the ungrateful charity bride, the ambitious fortune hunter, and the sentimental fool who had traded a handsome fiancé for a decaying title. None of them resembled her, but all of them were beginning to walk ahead of her into rooms. When the carriage stopped outside Lady Avelmere's house, Miriam saw Arthur Valehurst waiting near the steps. He wore a dark coat and held his cane in his right hand, his posture upright despite the damp edge in the air. The sight of him there, not hidden in the carriage, not arriving after her as though ashamed of association, steadied something she had not realized was trembling. He bowed to Aunt Mercy first, then to Miriam. Miss Ellersby. His voice remained rough, but less strained than it had sounded in Bloomsbury. Mrs. Ellersby, Lady Avelmere assures me the meeting is small. Aunt Mercy looked toward the crowded row of carriages. Lady Avelmere and I differ on the meaning of small. For one instant, Arthur's mouth nearly moved into a smile. Miriam saw it and felt an answering warmth she had not invited. He did not offer his arm at once. He merely stood aside, leaving her the choice of how to enter. It was an ordinary courtesy. It felt extraordinary. Inside, the meeting room had been arranged with all the gentle cruelty of good taste. There were chairs in a half circle, a subscription desk, 2 urns of tea, and a painted screen behind which committee papers had been placed. Every eye turned as Miriam entered. The silence was not complete. It had lace over it. Whispered phrases travelled behind fans. Poor girl, clever girl, desperate girl. Lady Hester Larkwell stood near the tea, urn in pale blue silk, the seed pearls again at her throat, like an announcement. She came forward with the sweetness of a blade dipped in honey. "Miss Ellersby, how brave of you to attend. Truly brave. Some women would have hidden themselves after such confusion." "Then I am relieved not to be some women," Miriam said. Hester's eyes brightened, and his grace as well. "How noble you are to face what other ladies might fear. It requires an uncommon heart to nurse where affection cannot reasonably be expected." A few women lowered their gazes, hungry for Miriam to redden. She did not. "Pity is a poor foundation for marriage, Lady Hester," she said. "Forged pity is worse." The room went still enough for the coal in the grate to crack loudly. Lady Avelmere, who had invited them under the banner of civility, made a nervous movement toward the tea-tray. Lady Drusilla was not present, but her influence sat in the room like another patroness. Hester's smile remained, though it lost color. "You mistake concern for insult." "No," Miriam said. "I have recently had cause to study the difference." Arthur stood several paces away, close enough to hear, distant enough not to swallow the exchange. Miriam felt the weight of that restraint. He could have crushed Hester with a sentence, and part of the room expected him to do precisely that. He did not. He allowed Miriam's words to remain hers. Lady Avelmere fluttered forward. "Perhaps we should begin with the accounts under review. His Grace has requested a clarification of certain unfortunate phrases that have appeared in print." "Forged pledge," Miriam said quietly. Lady Avelmere blinked. "Yes, well, certain unfortunate forged phrases." Arthur lowered his gaze for a moment, and Miriam suspected he was hiding another almost smile. The meeting began badly, which meant it began honestly. A clerk read from a page describing recent subscriptions, and Miriam, seated beside Aunt Mercy, listened while names and sums moved through the air, like embroidery viewed from the wrong side. Hester poured tea with elegant wrists. Several patronesses watched Arthur more than the accounts. Miriam understood why. People wanted proof of decay. They wanted him to cough, shake, snarl, or reveal some moral deformity to justify the ugliness of their whispers. Instead, he sat with composed severity, asking exact questions in his damaged voice and spending each word like coin. When the clerk mentioned the widow's pension list, Hester turned slightly. "Mrs. Ellersby's name appears there, does it not? A delicate situation, surely. One would hate for Miss Ellersby's present uncertainty to affect a dependent relation." Aunt Mercy went very pale. Miriam's hand tightened around her reticule, but she kept her voice level. "My aunt's need is not a leash, Lady Hester. Of course not. I only meant that gratitude is sometimes expressed through prudence, and threats are often expressed through concern." Lady Avelmere dropped her spoon. This time, Arthur did speak. "Mrs. Ellersby's pension will not be altered by anyone in this room." Hester lifted her brows. "How commanding, Your Grace." "How necessary," he replied. The clerk resumed with a tremor in his voice. Miriam's attention caught on a phrase near the end of the page. "Private pledge language circulated to committee correspondence." Her head lifted. "What correspondence?" The clerk looked to Hester before answering. It was brief, almost nothing, but Arthur saw it too. "The question was Miss Ellersby's," Arthur said. "Answer her." The clerk swallowed. "Only those assisting with notices, miss. Printers, runners, copyists, certain committee ladies." Miriam felt the first clean edge of discovery. Then phrases from a supposedly private card were copied before. His Grace removed it from the hall. No one answered. That was answer enough. After the meeting dissolved into brittle politeness, Miriam walked toward the subscription screen where spare cards had been placed. She wanted only to see whether the pinprick pattern Mr. Bell had noticed appeared elsewhere. Before she could reach them, Phineas stepped from behind the painted panel. He should not have been there. He had no reason to attend a ladies' committee meeting except the oldest reason in the world: control. "Miriam," he said softly, "you are making yourself ridiculous." She stopped. The room was not empty, but the screen hid them from most eyes. "Move aside. You used to be gentler." "No, I used to be easier for you." His expression hardened. "You think Brackenholt will marry you properly. He is using you because scandal has made you convenient. At least I know what I am." "Yes," Miriam said. "That has become clear." He reached toward her reticule. "What do you carry in that little case? Some keepsake to make yourself tragic?" Before his fingers touched the silk, Arthur's voice came from the end of the screen. "Miss Ellersby, do you wish me to remain?" Phineas froze. Miriam turned. Arthur stood with his cane planted lightly before him, his face calm, his eyes not calm at all. He had not asked Phineas to step away. He had not presumed Miriam required rescue. He had asked her. The difference moved through her like air after confinement. "Yes," she said, "I do." Arthur remained. Nothing more, nothing less. Phineas looked between them, searching for weakness, finding only a line he could not cross without witnesses. "This is not over," he muttered. "No," Miriam said, "but it is no longer private." He left through the side door, his retreat smooth enough for any onlooker to mistake it for choice. Miriam exhaled only after he vanished. Arthur did not move closer. "Are you unharmed?" "Yes." "Angry? Very good." That surprised a laugh from her, small and unsteady. Arthur heard it as if it mattered. Perhaps it did. At the front steps, the damp air had thickened into a fine mist. Carriages waited in a dark line. Society lingered behind the curtains, eager to interpret every gesture. Arthur looked at the watching windows, then back at Miriam. He shifted his cane to his left hand with visible care and offered his right arm. Slowly, publicly, without demand, Miriam understood what acceptance would mean. Not surrender, not gratitude, alliance. Her fingers hovered for one breath. Then she laid her gloved hand upon his sleeve. The muscle beneath the cloth stilled. Arthur did not cover her hand with his. He did not draw her closer. He simply adjusted his pace to hers as they descended the steps together. Behind them, Mayfair watched a woman who had been handed across a table walk beside a duke, as though her own will had placed her there. In the carriage, Aunt Mercy dabbed at her eyes and pretended the mist had followed them inside. Arthur remained on the pavement until the door closed, then inclined his head. As the carriage pulled away, Miriam glanced down at her reticule. The cracked needle case lay safely within. For the first time since the black seal had appeared, the crack did not feel like damage alone. It felt like a hinge that still opened. The journey to Dunmarsh Hall began under sky the colour of pewter. 1 week after Miriam had taken Arthur Valehurst's arm before the watching windows of Mayfair. London had not forgiven her for refusing to behave like a woman ruined. It had filled its breakfast tables with newer inventions, each more certain than the last. Some said the Duke had purchased her silence. Others said she had discovered pity could be more profitable than affection. Lady Hester, with her seed pearls and careful sighs, had made herself visible everywhere Phineas appeared. While Miriam's name moved through drawing rooms like a stain no one admitted to spreading. Yet the formal engagement notice, drafted by Mr. Osric Bell and corrected twice by Miriam's own hand, had also entered circulation. It did not call her charitable. It did not call her grateful. It stated that Miss Miriam Ellersby and Arthur Valehurst, Duke of Brackenholt, had entered a temporary understanding while forged pledges and malicious falsehoods were examined. Miriam had underlined "forged" before signing her approval. Mr. Bell had looked as if he wished to applaud and feared it would be unprofessional. Now she sat in the carriage opposite Aunt Mercy, the cracked forget-me-not-needle case resting within her reticule as the smoke of London thinned behind them and the Kent road unrolled through hedgerows, washed by spring rain. Arthur rode ahead for the first miles, then joined them at the posting stop to ensure Aunt Mercy had taken tea and that the horses were changed without haste. He did not fuss. He did not hover. He only noticed. When the innkeeper's wife brought Aunt Mercy a chipped cup with tea leaves floating thickly at the rim, Arthur exchanged it for his own without comment, as if such attention were not tenderness but order restored. Miriam saw it. She also saw how he pressed 2 fingers briefly against his throat after speaking with the ostler. His voice, damaged by old fever, did not permit waste. London had called it decay. On the road it seemed more like discipline. By late afternoon, the carriage turned between 2 stone pillars half covered in ivy. Dunmarsh Hall rose beyond a sweep of damp lawn, long and grey, with mullioned windows catching the last diluted light. It was not the monstrous ruin gossip had promised. No vines strangled the chimneys. No black water crept beneath the door. Yet the house bore the quiet of a place that had closed certain rooms against memory. One wing stood shuttered. The gravel was raked, but sparse. The gardens had been tended for survival rather than display. Miriam looked at the house and understood how easily cruelty could turn austerity into rot. A house without vanity looked like failure to people who lived by reflection. Arthur stood at the foot of the steps when the carriage stopped. He had changed horses somewhere beyond Sevenoaks and reached the estate ahead of them. His cane rested in his right hand. Behind him, a housekeeper in black silk and a butler with silver hair waited with formal composure. "Mrs. Ellersby, Miss Ellersby," Arthur said, bowing. "Welcome to Dunmarsh." Aunt Mercy peered up at the house. "It appears to have a roof, Your Grace. I confess London led me to expect moss where the drawing-room should be." The butler's mouth twitched. Arthur's eyes warmed almost imperceptibly. "We keep the moss in the library, Mrs. Ellersby. It discourages callers." Miriam looked at him in surprise. The line was so dry she might have missed it, had his gaze not met hers for half a second. "Then I shall be careful not to compliment the library too warmly," she said. "It may take offence." The housekeeper introduced herself as Mrs. Vale, and if she was startled by Miriam's presence, she had too much training to show it. Aunt Mercy was given a chamber in the family corridor, with a maid assigned and a sitting room between her room and Miriam's. Arthur explained every arrangement with such exact propriety that Miriam began to understand. He had considered not merely what was proper, but what would protect her from needing to ask. That mattered. Asking had become tiring. After tea, he led them not to the grand salon, but to a smaller room facing the east lawn. There, upon a long table, lay neat bundles of letters tied in cotton tape, petitions folded and labelled, and ledgers marked by county and regiment. "These are the accounts Lady Drusilla claimed to manage?" Miriam asked. "Copies," Arthur said. "The originals remain with the committee, or so I am told. These were sent to me quarterly because I insisted upon knowing where my endowment went." Aunt Mercy lowered herself into a chair. "There are so many." "Widows are not rare," Arthur said. The words were plain, and all the sadder for it. Miriam moved closer to the table. The papers smelled faintly of dust, ink, and long travel. Some petitions were written in fine, careful hands. Others were dictated to parish clerks, the letters too round, the names signed with crosses. She touched one packet whose edge had torn in transit, nearly freeing the contents. Without thinking, she opened her reticule and took out the forget-me-not needle case. The hinge caught. She paused. Arthur noticed, but said nothing. That silence allowed her to continue. She removed the tiny needle and a length of plain thread tucked inside for emergencies. Then repaired the torn packet with 3 small stitches near the fold so the widow's papers would not scatter. "You needn't trouble yourself," Aunt Mercy murmured. "It is no trouble." Miriam tied the thread and smoothed the packet. A torn paper is too easily dismissed as disorder. A woman's need should not be rejected because her petition arrived untidy. When she looked up, Arthur was watching her, not with gratitude, and not with surprise exactly, but with a gravity that made the little act feel seen without being made into performance. "That widow's husband served in the 43rd, he said. "She has 3 daughters. Her first petition was returned because the parish seal had blurred." Miriam's fingers rested on the repaired edge. "You remember them?" "I try." It was not the answer of a man seeking praise. It was the answer of a man who feared forgetting would become another kind of harm. Aunt Mercy, perhaps, sensing the weight between them, asked Mrs. Vale to show her the chamber before supper, when she had gone, leaving the door open and a footman visible in the corridor. Miriam remained by the ledger table. Arthur stood across from her, one hand upon the back of a chair rather than his cane. The afternoon light had lowered. It touched the scar at his throat and turned it pale as old wax. "They call this house rotting," Miriam said, then regretted the bluntness. Arthur did not flinch. "They call me the same. They are wrong about the house." His gaze lifted. "Only the house." Heat rose in her face, not from impropriety, but from the dangerous honesty of the question. "I do not know you well enough to make a full inventory, Your Grace." A merciful answer. An honest one. He looked down at the ledgers. "Marsh fever took my voice for several months. When it returned badly. I withdrew because speech became labour and pity became unbearable. London mistook absence for decay. After a while, contradiction seemed an extravagant use of breath." Miriam heard the fatigue beneath the dryness. For the first time, he had given her not evidence, but something nearer a wound. She did not soften her voice into pity. She would have hated that in his place. "And so you sent money where you could not send yourself." He turned very still. She remembered his words from the outline of his life, spoken not yet aloud until now, but visible in every tied petition before her. He said, "I have spent years sending money where I could not send myself." The room changed around the sentence. It was a confession without ornament. Miriam looked at the table, at the names of women whose survival had depended upon men in rooms deciding whether they were worthy of relief. Then we should discover whether it arrived. She drew the nearest ledger toward her. Arthur moved at the same moment, then stopped. Instead of keeping the book on his side, he placed it nearer to her, turned so the light fell across the page. It was a small thing. It was also not small at all. Men had been placing documents before Miriam for days as traps, claims, threats, and lies. Arthur placed this one before her as trust. She bent over the columns. The entries were clean at first glance. Too clean, perhaps. Names, sums, dates, committee initials. Then she saw it. These initials repeat. Arthur came no closer than propriety allowed. but his attention sharpened. Committee initials often repeat. Not like this. She opened her needle case again and withdrew the fine needle. Look at the paper just above the initials. Do you see these pricks? Pinholes. Thread pricks, she said. Not from binding. Someone has folded several subscription cards together and marked them through at once. See here. 3 small punctures above M.E. Here again, above a widow named Mary Eddowes, and here above Margaret Ellis. Arthur's face hardened. M.E. Miriam's own initials. Yes, she said. The cold that moved through her now was not fear. It was recognition. My forged initials repeated beside 3 widows. Arthur reached for another packet, then stopped and let her open it first. She found the same marks. 3 pricks, evenly spaced. These women are marked as having received supplements from a private pledge, she said, but the copy says funds were deferred. Deferred, Arthur repeated. His voice roughened dangerously, a polite word for stolen if no payment followed. A footman entered with a silver tray and a note. Arthur took it, read, and his expression closed. Lady Drusilla has announced a public alms box inspection in London. We are requested to attend. Requested? Miriam asked, commanded, dressed in lace. She looked down at the ledger, then at the needle in her hand. The small steel point caught the last light. Her mother's case was cracked. Her name had been forged. 3 widows had been used as shadows beneath her initials. Miriam closed the ledger gently. Then we shall attend. Arthur's eyes met hers. You need not return to that room. No, she said. But if they used my name to deny bread to women who asked for help, I will not hide while they call it charity. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the damp fields darkened toward evening. Inside, the first true shape of the enemy emerged, not as scandal alone, but as a ledger full of quiet theft. Arthur bowed his head once, not as a duke, granting permission, but as a man accepting an equal will. Then we shall need better evidence. Miriam slid the repaired widow's petition beside the marked ledger page. We have begun. London received Miriam Ellersby back, as if it had been waiting at the window, with a candle and a knife. The public alms box inspection was held in the committee room behind Lady Drusilla Larkwell's preferred subscription hall, a chamber smaller than the first but more dangerous. For that very reason, there was less space for mercy to breathe. The long table had been covered in green baize. 2 iron-bound charity boxes sat at its center, flanked by account books, folded receipts, and a little brass scale used for weighing coin. Patronesses filled the chairs nearest the hearth. Clergymen stood with grave faces near the wall. A clerk waited with ink on his cuff and fear in his eyes. Miriam entered with Aunt Mercy at her side, Arthur Valehurst behind them, and the knowledge of 3 marked widows folded like a blade inside her mind. She had not brought the Dunmarsh ledger copy. Arthur had advised caution, and Miriam had agreed because evidence, once displayed too soon, could be explained away before it matured into proof. Instead, she carried only her reticule, the cracked forget-me-not needle case within it, and the memory of the thread pricks above her initials. Lady Drusilla rose from the head of the table in mourning black so elegant that sorrow itself seemed to have been trained to flatter her. Miss Ellersby, she said, how kind of you to attend. Some would have found the strain too much. I have found clarity less tiring than rumor, Miriam replied. Lady Hester stood beside the alms box, pale blue ribbons at her sleeves, her expression all sweetness and injury. Phineas lingered near the mantel, handsome and composed, as if the last week had not stripped him of every right to stand near Miriam's name. His gaze moved from her face asked Arthur then to the room, calculating which audience most deserved his grief. Arthur said nothing. His silence did not abandon her. It made room. Lady Drusilla gestured to the table. "We are here to restore confidence in a charitable work that has been unjustly shadowed. His Grace's concerns, though severe, are of course welcome. We all desire transparency." "Then begin with the Count," Miriam said. A small pause. "The Count," Hester repeated. "The alms box," Miriam said. "Who counted it before it was brought into this room?" Lady Drusilla's smile remained, but her hand moved once over the papers. The box was sealed after the last subscription afternoon. "By whom?" Miriam asked. The clerk looked down. A clergyman cleared his throat. Hester laughed softly. "My dear Miss Ellersby, you speak as if we are in a magistrate's office. It's only a charity box. Then it should be simple to answer." Arthur's cane touched the floor, not loudly. "Enough. Miss Ellersby's question is reasonable." The clerk swallowed. Lady Drusilla held the key, "Your Grace." The seal was checked by Mr. Fenton, the assistant secretary. "And the coin?" Miriam asked. "Was it counted before this morning?" Lady Drusilla lifted her chin. "The purpose of this inspection is to count it now. Then no one in this room can say what was inside before today." The words settled over the table. Hester's fan opened. "One might almost think you feared what would be found." Miriam looked at her. "One might think many things, Lady Hester. Thinking is not proof." Lady Drusilla gave the clerk a nod too swift to be natural. He unlocked the first box. Coins spilled onto the green baize with a bright, accusing sound. Pennies, half-crowns, shillings, 2 sovereigns, a small folded paper, and then a packet tied with blue thread. Miriam felt the room's attention sharpen before she knew why. Hester reached for the packet first. "How odd." Arthur's voice cut across the motion. "Do not touch it." Hester froze, hand suspended. Her lashes lowered. "Your Grace, I only meant to assist." "Then assist by waiting." The clerk untied the thread with shaking fingers and unfolded the packet. Inside lay several coins wrapped in a square of fine lawn. Lady Drusilla leaned closer, then turned very slowly toward Miriam's reticule. "This is unfortunate." Miriam did not move. Phineas sighed as if struck by reluctant sorrow. "Miriam." Arthur's jaw tightened, but still he did not answer for her. Hester looked at the room with bright pity. "The lawn is embroidered." She lifted it with the tips of 2 fingers, now that the clerk had opened it, careful to display the corner. 3 tiny forget-me-nots had been stitched in faded blue thread. Aunt Mercy whispered, "No." Miriam's pulse struck once hard. Her mother had embroidered forget-me-nots on many household pieces before her eyesight failed. Half a dozen such cloths had passed through Larkwell hands during committee work and charity mending. One had been lent months ago with a basket of clean linen for Lady Drusilla's widow's parcels. Miriam understood the trap with sickening speed. Hester's eyes glistened with false regret. Perhaps it was placed there by mistake. Perhaps Miss Ellersby meant to return it. We must be charitable even toward confusion. "It was found in the alms box," Lady Drusilla said, "and the embroidery is distinctive." Phineas stepped forward. "No one wishes to accuse Miss Ellersby harshly. She has been under strain. Discovering that His Grace's fortune is bound so tightly to widows' trusts must have been a disappointment after all that has been implied." Miriam looked at him then, and for the first time she did not feel pain. She felt contempt, clean and almost calm. "You believe I stole coins because the Duke is less profitable than gossip promised. I'm saying distress makes people do reckless things. Then you must be very distressed indeed." The room stirred. Phineas's mouth hardened. Lady Drusilla spoke over him. "Miss Ellersby, this is not the moment for cleverness." "No," Miriam said. "It is the moment for the count." She turned to the clerk. "How much is in that packet?" £2, 11 shillings, he said after a quick tally. And how much was missing from the 3 marked widow supplements deferred in the last quarterly copy? The question entered the room like a draught under a locked door. Arthur's eyes moved to her face. He knew then what she had chosen to reveal and what she still withheld. The clerk's lips parted. "I do not have that figure before me, but you know whether it is near." Lady Drusilla's voice sharpened. "Miss Ellersby, you are inventing figures to distract from an embroidered cloth found among charitable funds." Arthur spoke then, quietly. "Answer the question." The clerk looked as if he might become ill. "I cannot say without the ledger, Your Grace." "Convenient," Miriam said. Hester recovered quickly. "What a strange interest you have in boxes, ledgers, and keys. One begins to wonder when it began." Phineas, sensing the room's appetite, added softly, "She always had a careful eye for money." Miriam almost smiled. A useful quality when men are careless with it. A few older ladies looked away to hide their reaction. Lady Drusilla was not amused. "The box will be sealed again. The packet will remain with the committee until His Grace's solicitor may inspect it. Miss Ellersby, for your own sake I advise silence." Miriam placed both gloved hands upon the edge of the table. "No." The word was as quiet as it had been in the first hall, and stronger for having survived it. "Before this box is sealed, I ask again. Who counted it before it was opened?" No one answered. "Who witnessed the seal after the room was arranged?" Silence. "Who can swear that packet was not placed there this morning?" The room had no answer for that either. Arthur stepped closer, not ahead of her, but beside the chair at her right. Let the minutes show those questions were asked and not answered. The clerk wrote so quickly, his pen scratched. Lady Drusilla's face went still. That was when Miriam knew the day had not cleared her. It had frightened them. Sometimes that was the first step toward truth. The inspection ended in fragments of politeness. No apology was offered. No accusation was withdrawn. The embroidered lawn was wrapped again and locked in a drawer under committee authority, though Arthur's solicitor would be notified. Miriam left the room without lowering her head, only when the carriage door closed behind her. With Aunt Mercy safely opposite and Arthur seated beside the forward-facing window at a proper distance, did her composure crack. Not loudly, not prettily. Her breath caught once, then again, and the gloved hand in her lap began to tremble. She closed it around the reticule, feeling the hard line of the cracked needle case inside. "They used my mother's work," she said, "not merely my name. Her work." Aunt Mercy turned her face toward the window, giving the dignity of not staring at grief. Arthur did not speak at once. The wheels jolted over the stones. Outside, Mayfair slid past in grey facades and polished doors. Then Arthur placed his right hand palm up on the seat between them. He did not reach for her. He did not command comfort. He offered it like a question. Miriam looked at that hand. The same hand had held the false pledge card, steadied a cane, offered her public alliance at Lady Avelmere's steps. It waited now, still and open. She could refuse it. That was why she could accept. After a long pause, she laid her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed only enough to be present. Warmth moved through the kidded leather, restrained and human. "You were magnificent," Aunt Mercy said thickly, still looking out the window. Miriam gave a small, broken laugh. "I was accused of stealing from widows." Arthur's thumb did not move over her hand. He kept the contact proper, steady and wholly unlike possession. You asked the question they could not answer. She turned toward him. His face was pale from the day's strain, his throat marked by the effort of speech, but his eyes held hers without pity. "Will it be enough?" she asked. "Not yet." He looked down at their joined hands, then back at her. But it frightened the right people. A sharp knock struck the carriage roof before they had gone 3 streets. Arthur released her hand at once, not with haste, but with respect, and lowered the window. A boy from Mr. Bell's office handed up a sealed note and darted away. Arthur broke it, read, and his expression changed. "What is it?" Miriam asked. He passed her the page, because this concerned her, and he had learned already that she would not tolerate being protected from her own life. Mr. Bell's message contained one sentence underlined twice. The coins from the packet bear tally scratches used by the Larkwell household steward. Miriam looked at the words until the ink steadied. Then she closed her hand, not around the needle case this time, but around the first hard proof that the trap had a maker. By the 3rd week of Miriam Ellersby's temporary engagement, London had learned to speak of her disgrace in charitable language. It no longer said she had been abandoned. It said she had been providentially redirected. It no longer said she had been accused. It said certain questions had arisen. It no longer said Phineas Larkwell had betrayed her. It said Lord Phineas bore his disappointment with admirable Christian restraint, while Miss Ellersby found consolation in a higher rank. The formal committee hearing was held on a damp Thursday afternoon in a long room behind Lady Avelmere's house, chosen because Lady Drusilla claimed neutrality would soothe the donors. Nothing about the room felt neutral. The chairs had been arranged so that Miriam sat beneath the gaze of 12 patronesses, 2 clergymen, 1 assistant secretary, and a portrait of a dead bishop who looked as if he had never forgiven anyone. Mr. Osric Bell occupied a chair near the side table with his document case closed at his feet. Aunt Mercy sat beside Miriam, pale but steady. Arthur Valehurst stood behind the chair reserved for him, cane in hand, his face more colourless than usual from the strain of too many public appearances in too few days. On the table before Lady Drusilla lay the sealed drawer packet from the alms box inspection, a copy of the committee minutes, and several cards pinned to a blue ribbon. The original black-sealed pledge card was not among them. Miriam knew because Mr. Bell had told her before they entered that it remained under his lock. That should have reassured her. Instead, when Lady Hester Larkwell rose with a cream card in her gloved hand, Miriam felt the old violation return. It was not the original. It was worse in a different way. It was a copy made large enough for everyone to see, with Miriam's forged sentence reproduced in dark ink beneath a crude sketch of the Black Seal. "We must begin," Hester said, her voice trembling just enough to be admired, "with the matter Miss Ellersby now denies." Arthur's head lifted. "That is not evidence." Hester lowered her eyes. "No, Your Grace, it is memory. The committee has been wounded by shifting accounts. We were told Miss Ellersby gave herself nobly, then told she did not. We were told she sought truth, then found funds wrapped in a cloth embroidered by her family. We were told she wished only to protect widows, yet questions seem to follow every box she approaches." Miriam heard Aunt Mercy draw breath sharply. She placed one hand over her aunt's, then removed it before anyone could use comfort as proof of weakness. Lady Drusilla nodded to the clerk. "Call Mrs. Vale's former kitchen maid." A young woman entered from the rear, cheeks flushed, bonnet strings tied too tightly beneath her chin. Miriam did not know her. The girl's eyes darted once toward Hester, then dropped. "Name," Mr. Bell said. The clerk answered before the maid could. "Nellie Price, formerly employed in the Larkwell household, briefly engaged for charitable parcel work." Arthur's hand tightened on his cane. Miriam felt the shift in him like a change in weather. "Miss Price," Lady Drusilla said gently, "you may speak without fear. Did Miss Ellersby ever inquire how the alms box was kept?" The maid swallowed. "Yes, my lady." The room leaned forward. "Tell us what she asked." "She asked where the key was kept, and whether the box could be opened without breaking the seals." A small sound moved through the patronesses, satisfaction disguised as sorrow. Phineas, who had no official place at the hearing, and yet had somehow been permitted to stand near the mantel, bowed his head as if the answer pained him beyond words. Miriam looked at the maid. "When did I ask you this?" Nellie twisted her gloves. "At Lady Drusilla's house, miss." "Which day?" "I don't remember exactly. Was Aunt Mercy with me?" "I don't know." "Was I in the drawing room, the passage, the parcel room, the hall?" The maid's lips parted. "I don't remember." Miriam turned toward the committee. She remembers the question, but not the room in which it was asked. Hester stepped forward. A frightened servant should not be badgered by a lady of superior station. "How fortunate for frightened servants that you discovered tenderness today," Miriam said. A few eyes flickered. Hester's face hardened, then softened again so quickly the change might have been imagined. Lady Drusilla lifted a paper. "Miss Price also recalls Miss Ellersby saying, 'Some ladies survive by knowing where charity keeps its keys.'" Arthur went utterly still. Miriam felt the sentence strike him too. She had never said it. But it resembled something Lady Drusilla had said in another form, a polished threat about Aunt Mercy's pension and the goodwill of the committee. Miriam looked at the maid. "Who taught you that phrase?" Nellie's mouth trembled. "No one, miss." "Then say it again." "I don't wish to, because it was given to you, not remembered." Lady Drusilla's voice cut in. "Enough." Arthur spoke at the same time, rough and controlled. "No, not enough." His anger filled the room, and for one dangerous moment Miriam felt protected by it. Then she saw the price. His throat tightened. His face had gone pale around the mouth. The room was full of people who would call his fury decay and her silence guilt. Mr. Bell rose. The witness's statement should be recorded as contested. "I also request the production of the committee instruction notes given to parcel workers." Lady Drusilla's smile froze. Private administrative notes are hardly relevant. A witness has repeated a phrase that may have originated in them. "May," Hester repeated, such a hungry little word. The hearing limped onward, but its wound had been made. By the time the patronesses stood, Miriam had not been condemned. Yet neither had she been cleared. That was the cruelty of it. Society did not require proof to punish a woman. It required only an unfinished question. In the corridor beyond the hearing room, Arthur waited until Aunt Mercy had been offered a chair near the window before he spoke to Mr. Bell in a low tone. Miriam stood close enough to hear only fragments. "Too exposed. Next inquiry. Keep her away. I will handle the evidence." At first, she thought she had misunderstood. Then Mr. Bell looked briefly toward her with discomfort, and Arthur, seeing the glance, fell silent. Miriam crossed the corridor. "Keep whom away?" Arthur's expression altered. Not guilt yet. Concern first, which was almost worse. "Miss Ellersby." "Keep whom away?" she repeated. He drew a breath, and she saw the effort it cost him. "The next inquiry will be uglier. If Lady Drusilla produces more false witnesses, you should not be forced to sit beneath every accusation while we test them." Forced? I meant spared. No, Your Grace, you meant removed. His jaw tightened. I meant protected. The word which had once steadied her now closed around her like a locked door. Miriam looked at the man who had asked permission before remaining near her, who had offered his arm rather than taking her hand, who had placed ledgers toward her instead of over her. That man was still there, but fear had stepped in front of him. You promised no decision in my name, she said. Protection is not an exception. Arthur's face went very still. Mr. Bell looked away. Aunt Mercy rose, but did not interfere. Miriam opened her reticule and withdrew the folded paper of engagement terms, the one written in her own hand in the Bloomsbury parlour. The cracked needle case brushed her fingers as she did so. Its hinge caught, then held. Miss Ellersby, Arthur said quietly, don't. The contraction in his voice hurt more than any formal plea would have done. Miriam nearly faltered. Then she remembered the committee room, Hester's copied pledge, the maid's rehearsed fear, Phineas beside the mantel, looking mournful over the ruin he had built. She held out the paper. I entered this understanding because my name had been used without my consent. I will not stay in it if my safety becomes the new excuse for the same offense. He did not take the paper at once. I was trying to spare you. I know. That was the tragedy. But I am not asking to be spared from my own truth. His hand closed around the document at last. He held it as if it weighed more than paper. In the window behind him, rain blurred the street into grey streaks. Miriam turned to Aunt Mercy. We are going home. Arthur moved once, as if to offer his arm, then stopped himself. It was the right choice and the wrong pain. Miriam saw it. She saw that he understood too late, that comfort could not be offered by the hand that had just tried to guide her away from the battlefield. She passed him without touching his sleeve. At the door, Phineas appeared from the lower hall, his smile faint and poisonous. A difficult day, Miriam? She paused only long enough to answer. Yes, but not as difficult as the day you'll be required to tell the truth. His smile vanished. She walked out into the wet afternoon with Aunt Mercy beside her. The copied list of marked subscription initials folded in her reticule and the cracked needle case pressed beneath her palm. Behind her, Arthur remained in the corridor holding the returned terms, learning perhaps that a woman could be protected into loneliness as surely as she could be betrayed into shame. Miriam did not weep when she reached Aunt Mercy's rooms in Bloomsbury. She removed her gloves, placed the cracked forget-me-not needle case upon the writing desk, and asked for every scrap of paper they possessed that bore a committee mark. Aunt Mercy watched her for a long moment from beside the tea tray, face drawn with worry and pride. My dear, you have been accused before half of Mayfair. Then half of Mayfair may wait while I learn how the other half was robbed. The rain had followed them from the hearing, tapping against the window panes with a persistent little sound like a clerk's pen. London outside had blurred into wet brick, carriage wheels, and grey umbrellas. Inside, Miriam drew the curtains wide to catch what remained of the afternoon light. She laid out the copied list of marked subscription initials, 2 old receipts from Aunt Mercy's pension correspondence, a folded notice Lady Drusilla had sent months earlier, and the household mending basket from which she had once provided linen squares for charity parcels. She did not have the original pledge card. It remained, by Arthur's earlier arrangement, under Mr. Bell's protection. She did not have the sealed packet from the alms box. That remained in committee custody until Mr. Bell could inspect it. But she had memory, paper, thread, and the one skill no patroness had ever thought dangerous in a woman: the ability to notice where a needle had passed. For 2 hours she worked without speaking. Aunt Mercy sat nearby, winding thread badly because she needed something to do with her hands. Miriam examined each subscription copy against the window. The pinholes were never random, 3 above initials tied to public praise. 2 beside sums later marked deferred. 1 at the corner of names that appeared in speeches but not in payment columns. The pattern emerged slowly, then all at once. It was not merely a method of sorting cards. It was a language: inflated pledge. Withheld payment, display name. Miriam felt the room narrow around the discovery. Her own initials, M.E., had been repeated beside 3 widows: Mary Eddowes, Margaret Ellis, Martha Elkin, 3 women useful enough to be named at charity assemblies and poor enough to be ignored afterward. "Aunt," Miriam said, "do you remember the parcel list Lady Drusilla sent when you thanked her for the pension?" Aunt Mercy looked up. "The widow's parcels?" "Yes. I thought it odd. She asked for clean linen pieces when the committee could surely afford new cloth." She did not ask because she needed cloth. Miriam lifted one old linen square from the basket. In the corner, her mother had stitched 3 forget-me-nots in faded blue thread. She asked because she needed something that could be made to look like mine. Aunt Mercy's face went white. The cloth in the alms box. It may have come from our basket, or from one like it, but if they used our linen once, they may have used our correspondence too. She pulled open the cracked needle case. The hinge resisted, then yielded. The tiny needle inside caught the light. Miriam placed it through 3 existing pinholes on a subscription copy. The spacing matched the moles in 2 different pension notices. Not by accident, by system. A knock sounded below, and Aunt Mercy stiffened. Miriam did not move until the maid entered with a small sealed packet. "From Mr. Bell, miss. The boy says there's no answer required." Miriam took it. The seal was plain, not ducal, not black, not theatrical. Inside lay a note in Mr. Bell's compact hand and, wrapped separately, a traced copy of the original black-sealed pledge card made for her examination. Not the original card, but a faithful copy of its holes and signature pressure. Beneath Mr. Bell's note was a shorter one, written in a hand Miriam had already begun to recognize as Arthur's. "I return what should never have been removed from your power to examine. I will not call unless you permit it. I forgot that standing beside you means not stepping into your place. A.V." Miriam read the sentence once, then again. It did not ask forgiveness. It did not defend fear. It placed the evidence back in her hands, or as near as law and paper permitted. That restraint reached her more deeply than any apology, crowded with feeling, would have done. Aunt Mercy, pretending not to read, failed entirely. "That is a proper apology. It is the beginning of one," Miriam said. Yet her voice was softer than she intended. She set the note beside the needle case, not inside it, not yet. The work came first. By morning, she had enough to act. She wrote 2 letters in her own hand, one to Mary Eddowes and one to Margaret Ellis, using the addresses copied from the Dunmarsh ledger. Martha Elkin's address had been blurred, but the parish name remained. Aunt Mercy insisted on accompanying her, and because propriety mattered most when enemies watched for its absence, they hired a respectable closed carriage and took Mrs. Vale's recommended maid as additional attendants. The first widow lived in a narrow street off Lambeth, in rooms that smelled of soap, damp wool, and boiled onions. Mary Eddowes was younger than Miriam expected, with a baby asleep in a drawer lined with blankets and 2 little girls who stared at the visitors as if charity ladies belonged to the same category as tax collectors. She curtsied when she heard Miriam's name, then apologized for the chair with the broken rush seat. Miriam sat upon it at once. "Mrs. Eddowes, I have not come to inspect your gratitude." The woman's guarded face changed. "Just slightly." "Then why have you come, miss?" Miriam unfolded the copy of the ledger page. "To ask whether you received the supplement marked beside your name." Mary looked at the paper, then gave a little laugh without amusement. "They read my name at a meeting, didn't they? A neighbor told me. Said I was fortunate. Were you paid?" "Half once, then nothing. A young lady's maid came with papers and said the rest was delayed because the committee required a cleaner signature. I signed again." Miriam looked at Aunt Mercy, whose hands had gone still in her lap. "Can you describe the maid?" "Dark hair, thin face, spoke like she was repeating lessons. Lady Hester's maid, I think. I saw her once waiting near the carriage when Lady Larkwell came to the parish hall." The air seemed to tighten. Miriam did not smile. Triumph would have been indecent in that room. "Would you be willing to tell this to Mr. Bell, solicitor to the Duke of Brackenholt?" Mary's eyes filled with immediate fear. "I can't be dragged before ladies. They'll say I lied for money." Miriam folded her hands. "Then you shall not be dragged. You may give a written statement in your own rooms, with your parish curate present, if you wish. And if you refuse, I will not blame you." The widow studied her. "Why do you care, miss?" There were several answers. "Because they used your hunger to shame me. Because they used my name to hide your loss. Because a duke with a broken voice had kept your first petition when others would have burned it." Miriam chose the simplest truth. Because if they can make charity depend upon silence, none of us is safe. Mary Eddowes nodded once. That was enough. At the second address, Margaret Ellis had moved. But a neighbor directed them to a laundry yard near Westminster Bridge. There, among steam and linen lines, Miriam heard the same story in different words. A committee made, a second signature, a promised supplement reduced by excuses, a phrase repeated by both widows. For the committee's neatness, Miriam wrote it down. The phrase mattered. It sounded harmless enough for a patroness, precise enough for Lady Drusilla, and rehearsed enough to have been taught. By the time they returned to Bloomsbury, Miriam's hem was damp and Aunt Mercy was exhausted. But the case had turned. Not publicly, not yet. In the quiet parlor, Miriam spread the evidence across the desk and placed her needle through the copied card's pinholes, then through the pension notice, then through Mary Eddowes's duplicate receipt. The spacing matched. 3 holes. Inflated pledge. Display name. Withheld payment, she sat back slowly. They were never merely marking papers, Aunt Mercy whispered. "No," Miriam said. "They were marking people." Another note arrived before dusk, this one delivered by Mr. Bell himself, who looked rain-spotted and unusually satisfied. "His Grace instructed me not to call unless you requested me," he said from the threshold. "But I am a solicitor, not a duke, and therefore less romantic in my obedience." Aunt Mercy almost laughed. Miriam allowed him in. He placed a folded memorandum on the desk. "Your suspicion regarding the thank-you note was sound. Lady Drusilla's committee stored private correspondence with subscription samples. I have not yet recovered your original note, but a clerk admits such notes were kept in the same locked press as blank pledge cards." "A clerk admits?" Miriam asked. "Informally. Fear has made him talk near the truth without entering it." Miriam looked at the copied pledge signature, at the wrong outward flick of the final Y. Then the original note exists. Very likely, she touched the cracked needle case, The hinge held. "Then we find it." Mr. Bell inclined his head. "His Grace also asked me to say that the original pledge card remains available for your inspection whenever you choose." His words were, "Precisely. It concerns her name. She must not receive it second-hand." Miriam turned to the window so neither Mr. Bell nor Aunt Mercy would see too much in her face. Outside, the rain had stopped. The glass held her reflection faintly, tired, pale, unruined. "Tell His Grace," she said, "that I will inspect it when I am ready, and tell him I have found 2 widows who remember Lady Hester's maid." Mr. Bell's eyes sharpened. "That will frighten them." Miriam looked back at the desk, where needle marks lined up across 3 separate papers like a constellation finally named. "Good," she said quietly. "They have mistaken fear for a privilege that belongs only to them." Miriam agreed to meet Arthur Valehurst at Dunmarsh Chapel on a morning when the fields still held the silver damp of early rain. The decision had not been made because his note had softened her, though it had, nor because Mr. Bell had carried his apology with the awkward solemnity of a man delivering something more fragile than evidence, though he had. She agreed because the case had moved beyond wounded pride. Lady Drusilla had called a grand subscription renewal for the following week, a public attempt to seal the story before the truth could breathe, and Miriam would not walk into that hall with a broken trust at her side. Aunt Mercy came with her, of course, and sat in the front pew beneath a plain memorial tablet, close enough to satisfy propriety, far enough to permit honesty. The chapel was small, older than the house, with whitewashed walls, worn stone flags, and narrow windows through which the Kent light entered without ornament. There were no flowers except a few early forget-me-nots growing beyond the open door in the churchyard grass. Miriam noticed them and looked away. The cracked needle case was in her reticule, the copied pinhole charts and widow's statements folded beside it. Arthur stood near the chancel step when she entered, hat in hand, cane resting against the rail. He looked as if he had slept badly. His face was pale, and the old scar at his throat seemed sharper in the cool air. But he did not begin with illness, explanation, or rank. He bowed to Aunt Mercy, then to Miriam, and waited until she chose whether to come nearer. That at least he had learned before speaking. Miriam stopped 2 pews away. "Mr. Bell says Lady Drusilla has issued invitations for a subscription renewal." "Yes." Arthur's voice was low, roughened by restraint. "She means to gather donors before the widow's statements can be properly taken. If she can make society applaud her again, she hopes evidence will sound like vulgarity afterward. Then we have little time." "We do." He drew a breath, but did not reach for the papers in her hand. "Before we speak of her, I must speak of what I did." Miriam's fingers tightened around the folded list. "You mean the note to Mr. Bell. I mean the decision I made before writing it. The note was only the ink." She looked at him then. Rain tapped once from the chapel roof into the gutter outside. "Go on." Arthur's hand closed over the top of the pew before him, not hard, but as if steadiness had to be chosen. "I promised that no decision would be made in your name. Then I decided you should be kept from the next inquiry because I could not bear to watch them injure you again." His mouth tightened. That was fear dressed as care. It was still control. Miriam had prepared herself for defense. A man of his station had a dozen elegant ways to place blame upon circumstance, affection, danger, or female delicacy. Arthur used none of them. The absence of excuse unsettled her more than an argument would have done. "You wounded me," she said. "I know. Do you? I am trying to know it fully." He looked toward the altar, then back at her. When fever damaged my throat, physicians told me to avoid strain. Friends told me to avoid society. Family advisors told me to avoid ridicule. Every instruction sounded like mercy. In time, I discovered I had been buried alive in other people's good intentions. His voice roughened, and he paused until it steadied. Then I did the same to you. Miriam felt the sentence land deep, where anger had been protecting hurt. Being hidden is another form of burial, she said. His eyes closed briefly. Yes. Aunt Mercy shifted in the front pew, but did not turn. Miriam stepped one pace closer. I can forgive poor protection. I cannot build a life where every danger becomes permission to remove me from the room. I will not ask you to. No, you must do more than not ask. You must remember when fear makes asking inconvenient. His gaze held hers. I will, and if you forget, then you must tell me, and I must listen before I act. It was not a grand answer. It was better. Grand answers belonged to speeches. This one belonged to a future that would require practice. Miriam unfolded the copied chart and placed it upon the pew between them. Mary Eddowes and Margaret Ellis will give statements if Mr. Bell comes with their curate present. Both remember a maid connected to Lady Hester collecting second signatures. Both heard the phrase, "for the committee's neatness." The pinholes mark inflated pledges, withheld payments, and names used for display. The forged signature likely came from my thank you note to Lady Drusilla months ago. Arthur's attention sharpened, but he did not touch the papers until she nodded. Then he leaned over them, careful of the distance between their shoulders. This is more than suspicion. It is not yet enough. No, but it is a road, a dangerous one. Yes. His hand hovered near the page, then withdrew. I will follow where you lead on this. Miriam glanced at him. That sounds practiced. It is not. I am poor at it. The honesty almost undid her. His mouth curved faintly, without humor. Command has been easier. Silence easier still. Partnership will likely expose every bad habit I possess. I am not gentle with bad habits. I am beginning to depend upon that. The quiet that followed did not ache as it had in the corridor outside the committee room. It held tension, but also warmth. Dangerous because it was not demanded. Miriam looked toward the open chapel door. The forget-me-nots outside stirred in the wind. When they called you rotting, she said, I believed it meant illness or decay or some secret horror. And now I think society dislikes anything it cannot turn into ornament. Arthur looked away, and the movement revealed, more than if he had answered quickly. They came to Dunmarsh after the fever, he said. Not many. Enough. They expected tragedy to flatter them. A pale duke, a damaged voice, a house without music. They brought pity as if it were a visiting card. When I could not perform gratitude for it, they decided I had become monstrous. You are not monstrous. No, there was no vanity in the question, only old disbelief. Miriam stepped closer until the pew no longer stood between them. No. He looked down at her, and the restraint in him changed. It did not vanish. It trembled. Miss Ellersby. Miriam, she said, before caution could stop her. His breath caught once, barely audible. Miriam. Her name in his damaged voice did not feel stolen. It felt returned. She saw the effort it cost him not to reach for her, and that effort moved her more than any touch. So she chose. She set the papers on the pew, crossed the last small distance, and placed her arms around him. Arthur went completely still. For one heartbeat, she feared she had misread everything. Then his cane shifted softly against the rail as he freed his hand, slowly, giving her every chance to step away. She did not. His arms came around her with careful reverence, not possession, not hunger, not victory, only relief. Miriam rested her cheek briefly against his coat and felt the restrained breath leave him. He held her as if she had been entrusted, not claimed. Aunt Mercy made a sound from the front pew that was either a sniff or a prayer, and mercifully pretended to study the memorial tablet. Miriam drew back first, because the embrace had been hers to begin, and should be hers to end. Arthur released her at once. His eyes were darker than before, and for a moment he looked close to saying something neither of them was ready to place beneath witnesses, stone, and God. He did not say it. That restraint, too, was a promise. A rider arrived at the chapel door before either could speak again. Mrs. Vale's footman entered with a silver salver and a sealed invitation. Arthur broke it, read, and handed it to Miriam without being asked. Lady Drusilla Larkwell requested their attendance at a grand subscription renewal in Mayfair, where the committee would publicly reaffirm its charitable integrity and settle all unfortunate misunderstandings. Miriam read the words twice. Then she folded the invitation with steady hands. She wants the last room to belong to her. Arthur picked up his cane. Then we must decide what truth requires. Miriam gathered the pinhole chart, the widows' names, and the invitation. Not we as in you before me. No, he said, his voice was rough but certain. We as in beside. She looked at him across the worn chapel stones, feeling the warmth of the embrace still held somewhere beneath her ribs. Then beside is where you may stand. Arthur bowed his head once, not to a lady he pitied, nor a fiancé he managed, but to a woman whose forgiveness had come with terms. Outside, the rain had stopped. The forget-me-nots in the chapel grass shone brighter for being wet. By the time Miriam returned to London with Arthur Valehurst, Aunt Mercy, and Mr. Osric Bell, the city had already dressed itself for Lady Drusilla Larkwell's triumph. Her grand subscription renewal was announced in 3 drawing rooms before the invitations had fully dried, and every version carried the same promise beneath its polite phrasing. The unfortunate disturbances surrounding Miss Ellersby would be settled at last. Miriam understood the meaning. She was to be displayed, explained, softened, and folded away into the story. Lady Drusilla preferred. If she appeared meek, she would be called grateful. If she appeared firm, she would be called hardened by ambition. If she did not appear at all, Phineas would declare that shame had confirmed the truth. So she chose to attend. On the morning before the renewal, she stood in Aunt Mercy's Bloomsbury parlour, wearing a plain grey gown with narrow cuffs and no ornament at her throat, the cracked forget-me. Not needlecase lay openly in her reticule, not hidden beneath handkerchiefs as it had once been. Aunt Mercy looked her over with anxious pride. You might wear the blue ribbons. Lady Hester expects me to look either wounded or eager. Miriam fastened her glove. Grey will disappoint her. You have become rather formidable. No, I have become specific. Aunt Mercy gave a small laugh, then caught herself because the day ahead deserved caution. Arthur's carriage arrived precisely at 10. He came inside rather than sending a footman, and he greeted Aunt Mercy before turning to Miriam with the measured stillness that had become more intimate than any flourish. Since the chapel at Dunmarsh, something between them had changed and not changed. He did not touch her without cause. He did not speak with softness before servants. Yet when his eyes met hers, Miriam remembered the careful strength of his arms when she had chosen to step into them, and the memory moved beneath her composure like a hidden flame. Mr. Bell has secured access to the committee storage for 1 hour, Arthur said. Lady Drusilla believes he is reviewing chair lists and receipt copies. Then we should not waste her confidence. I am not sure confidence is the right word. Vanity, then. His mouth almost curved, more precise. The committee rooms behind the Mayfair subscription hall smelled of sealing wax, old paper, coal smoke, and flowers arranged too early for the evening's display. Footmen carried chairs into the larger hall beyond. Clerks hurried with lists. A harp stood under a dust sheet in the corner, as if music might make hypocrisy more digestible. Miriam entered with Mr. Bell and Aunt Mercy, while Arthur paused near the door to speak with the hall porter. It was not delay. It was guard work performed without display. The storage room itself was narrow, lined with presses and pigeonholes labelled by parish, regiment, pledge class, and private benevolence. Mr. Bell unlocked the case he had been permitted to examine and withdrew bundles of subscription cards tied with blue tape. "We have very little time," he said. "Then begin with anything marked private benevolence," Miriam replied. Lady Drusilla used softness where she meant secrecy. Mr. Bell looked at Arthur, who had entered behind them. Arthur did not answer for her. He only inclined his head as if to say the instruction required no male translation. Miriam felt that small act more keenly than she wished. She opened the first bundle and searched for pinholes. 2, 1, 3, 3, 1. The language revealed itself faster now that she knew how to read it. Inflated pledge, display name, withheld payment. Aunt Mercy sat near the open door as chaperone, though her eyes missed nothing. Arthur remained beside the press, still enough that his silence discouraged interruption. Then a scratching sound came from the far cabinet. Miriam looked up. A young clerk with sandy hair had opened the lowest drawer and was sliding a packet beneath his coat. Arthur crossed the room in 3 controlled steps and placed his cane across the drawer, not touching the man, merely preventing the theft from completing itself. "Put it on the table." The clerk went white. "Your Grace, I was instructed to take old circulars for burning." Miriam approached. "By whom?" The clerk's gaze flicked to Arthur, pleading with rank, because rank at least might be bribed by obedience. Arthur's voice was rough and low. "The question is Miss Ellersby's." The clerk swallowed. Lady Drusilla said the old samples were untidy. "Untidy," Miriam repeated. "Not inaccurate." "I don't know, miss." "Who pinned the cards?" "The ladies sorted them." "Which ladies?" "I only fetched the trays." Arthur said nothing. Miriam laid 1 card upon the table, then another, then a third. "These 3 have identical punctures. If one were pinned for filing, the holes would vary. These were marked together." The clerk looked at the cards as if they had betrayed him personally. Sometimes Lady Hester sorted the pledged names before the cards went to the display board. Mr. Bell's pen moved at once. "State that again." Panic entered the clerk's face. "I shouldn't have said. My mother has rooms through Lady Drusilla's recommendation." Miriam's anger eased into something colder and more useful. Lady Drusilla did not merely command. She tied every weak place in a household to her own fingers. "No one here is asking you to ruin your mother," Miriam said. "But if this fraud continues, more widows lose money, and more mothers depend upon a woman who can make truth cost rent." The clerk stared at her. Something in him shifted, not courage exactly, but shame made bearable by being seen. "Cards were pinned in bundles," he said in a whisper. 3 holes for names to be praised in speeches, 2 for payments delayed, 1 for names copied again later. Lady Hester said it saved time. "And the forged pledge?" Miriam asked. "Was my name copied here?" He hesitated. Then he reached into the drawer Arthur had blocked and drew out a folded sheet. "I was told to burn this." Miriam knew it before she opened it. The paper was older, softer at the folds. Her own hand crossed the page, written 3 months earlier in gratitude for Aunt Mercy's pension. Lady Drusilla, I thank you for the consideration shown to my aunt, Mrs. Ellersby. Please accept my sincere respect for the committee's charitable labor. Miriam Ellersby. There it was. Her true signature. The inward curve of the final Y. The source from which someone had traced obedience and called it sacrifice. For a moment, the room blurred. Arthur moved 1/2 step, then stopped. He had remembered. No decision for her, no comfort imposed, because she looked as though she might need it. Miriam, Aunt Mercy whispered. Miriam folded the note carefully and placed it beside the copied pledge. Mr. Bell, this is the original source. Yes, he said. His voice had softened, though the word remained professional. It is, the clerk covered his face. I only kept it because the handwriting was pretty. I thought it wrong to burn a lady's thanks. Miriam looked at him. Then your one disobedience may save several women. Footsteps sounded beyond the corridor. Hester's voice floated nearer, light and amused. The Duke is here already? How touching. One might almost think he mistrusts us. Arthur turned to the clerk. You will go with Mr. Bell through the back passage and give a written statement now. But Lady Drusilla does not outrank perjury. Mr. Bell seized the packet, the clerk's sleeve, and the moment with equal efficiency. Aunt Mercy rose, taking her cane. I shall go as well. A room full of gentlemen makes a nervous clerk more nervous, and I have a respectable cap. Despite everything, Miriam nearly smiled. Within minutes, the storage room emptied, except for Miriam and Arthur, with the door still half open and the noise of preparation beyond. She placed the true thank you note, the pinholed cards, and the copied pledge together. The evidence looked pitifully small for the harm it carried. They made gratitude into consent, she said. Arthur's face darkened. They made your kindness into a trap. No. She looked at the cards. They tried. His gaze moved to her reticule, where the cracked needle case showed its faded enamel edge. Are you able to continue? She glanced at him. That is a careful question. I am learning. Then yes, I am able. His hand lifted slightly, then paused. May I? She did not ask what he meant. She knew by the restraint in the question. Yes, he touched the edge of her sleeve with 2 fingers, not her skin, not enough for scandal, even had the door been wide. Yet the gentleness of it reached her with startling force. You should not have had to become so brave in order to be believed, he said. The words drew them closer than the touch. Miriam looked up at him, at the scar near his throat, at the mouth that shaped every sentence with effort, at the man who had once tried to spare her and now stood beside the truth she chose. For one suspended moment, she thought he might kiss her. More dangerously, she knew she would not have turned away because of fear. But the hall beyond filled with voices, and the hour was not theirs, not yet. Miriam stepped back first. Final truth before private comfort, she said. Arthur's eyes held hers, warm and wounded and proud. As you command. Hester's laughter sounded just beyond the doorway, followed by Phineas's smoother voice. Miss Ellersby has accepted her proper place at last. Miriam picked up the recovered thank you note and the copied pledge card. The sentence did not cut as deeply now. She had her true hand in one glove, their false hand in the other, and a duke who had learned to wait. Then, she said, and walked toward the opening doors. Let us show them where that place is. Miriam had taken 3 steps toward the subscription hall when Arthur's voice stopped her, not sharply, not with command, but with the quiet force of a man who had learned that asking could be braver than ordering. Miriam. She turned in the narrow passage between the committee storage room and the great hall. Beyond the double doors, Lady Drusilla's guests gathered in a warm swell of voices, silver teaspoons, rustling silk, and self-congratulation. Phineas's last words still hung in the air like perfume gone sour. Miss Ellersby has accepted her proper place at last. In Miriam's right hand lay the copied pledge card with its false declaration of sacrifice. In her left, folded against her glove, rested her true thank-you note, the one Lady Drusilla had used to steal the shape of her name. The recovered documents felt thin and terrible. Paper had nearly ruined her. Paper might yet save her. Arthur stood a few paces behind, his cane angled beneath his right hand, the pale scar at his throat, visible above his collar where fatigue had loosened his usual severity. The day had cost him. Miriam could see it in the careful economy of his breath, in the way his left hand rested near his coat, as if stiffness had become an old, unwanted companion. Yet his eyes were steady, not fearful now, not controlling, simply fixed upon her as if the next decision belonged wholly to her and mattered more than any room beyond them. "What is it?" she asked. Her voice sounded calm, but her heart had begun to beat hard. "Before we enter," he said, "you must know that you may still choose otherwise." For one instant, pain pricked through her. "Do you think I will run?" "No." The answer came at once. "I think you will stand even if it hurts you. That is why I must say this now." He came no closer. The open door of the storage room remained behind them. A footman crossed the distant corridor and vanished. Propriety had not abandoned them, though intimacy had drawn near enough to be felt. "I can expose the fraud," Arthur said. "Mr. Bell has the clerk. Your widow's statements can be taken formally. The pinholed cards, the marked coins, the true note, the forged pledge, all of it can be put before men who will understand ledgers, if they refuse to understand women. You needn't walk into that hall and give them another chance to stare at you." Miriam looked through the doorway. She saw a slice of the hall. Lady Hester's blue ribbons, Lady Drusilla's black gown, Phineas's dark head inclined toward a patroness, the gleam of the subscription table where her consent had first been made into a spectacle. "That sounds dangerously like kindness," she said. Arthur's mouth tightened, not in offense, but in memory. "It could become the old mistake if I pressed it. I am not pressing. I am placing the door where you can see it." Miriam looked back at him. The difference mattered. It mattered so much that her anger from the committee corridor, though not forgotten, settled into something cleaner. "I am tired of doors men arrange for me," she said. "One door to sacrifice, one door to safety, one door to silence, one door out of the room before the truth becomes inconvenient. Then choose no door. I have." She lifted the papers. "I am going in." Arthur bowed his head once. "Then I stand beside you." He said it simply, but the words struck the place in her that had first broken when Phineas smiled over her stolen name. Beside, not before, not above, not behind with pity. Beside, Miriam should have turned then. She should have walked into the hall with evidence in her hands and fire in her throat. Instead, another question rose, one that had been waiting beneath every ledger, every apology, every offered arm and withheld command. Perhaps it was the nearness of public battle. Perhaps it was the knowledge that once they crossed the threshold, the world would try again to name what stood between them. She needed to know before the world spoke. "Arthur." His eyes changed at the sound of his Christian name. She had used it once in the chapel, but here, in London, with scandal humming beyond the doors, it felt more dangerous. more deliberate. Yes, answer me not as the Duke of Brackenholt. Answer me as Arthur. His grip tightened slightly on the cane. I will try. Do you want me because I need defense? The question hurt to ask. She asked it anyway. Because they injured me in your name? Because marrying me would make the fraud cleaner to punish and the gossip easier to silence? No. Do you want me because I am useful to the truth? No. His voice roughened and he stopped, gathering the strength not merely to speak, but to speak without hiding behind rank. I value that. I honor it. But no. Miriam felt her courage waver for the first time that day. Then why? Arthur looked at her for a long, unguarded second, and the hall beyond seemed to fade into the muffled distance. Because I love you, Miriam. The words were quiet. They were not polished for effect. His damaged voice caught slightly on her name, and that made it more intimate, not less. Not as charity, not as rescue, and not as an answer to their cruelty. I love you because when they tried to write your name, you taught me how sacred a true hand can be. I love the woman who asks the question no one prepared for. I love the woman who mends a widow's torn petition before considering whether anyone is watching. I love the woman who refused my protection when it became another room without her consent. His throat worked, but he did not look away. And I love you enough to let you walk into that hall without taking a single step for you. Miriam could not move. All her life, admiration had come attached to usefulness. Approval had arrived when she was quiet, grateful, helpful, modest, inexpensive, or convenient. Phineas had once praised her gentleness because it cost him nothing. Lady Drusilla had praised her sacrifice because it would have erased her. Arthur named the parts of her that had resisted erasure. He did not make her softness small. He did not make her courage ornamental. He loved the hand that wrote no. The papers trembled once in her grip. I love you, Arthur. His breath caught. She stepped closer, choosing every inch. And I choose you while I am free enough to walk away. Not because you defended me. Not because your title can shelter me. Not because the room beyond us must be answered. I love you because you learned to put my name back into my keeping. I love you because you were wrong and did not ask me to call it right. I love you because beside you, I do not become smaller. The silence after her confession was alive. Arthur's eyes held hers with such restraint that it nearly broke her heart. He did not reach for her. Even now, when love had been spoken, he waited. May I kiss you? He asked. The question was so gentle that Miriam felt tears threaten, not from sorrow, but from the terrible relief of being asked. She set the papers carefully upon the narrow side table, keeping them within reach. Then she closed the last small distance herself. Yes, she said, you may. Arthur bent slowly, giving her time even after permission had been given. Miriam lifted her face to meet him. The kiss was quiet, brief and reverent, nothing like possession, nothing like triumph. His lips were warm, careful, and trembling with the restraint he did not abandon. Miriam's gloved hand rose to his sleeve, not to steady herself, but to answer him. When they parted, neither spoke at once. The world had not changed, not yet. Lady Drusilla still waited with her polished lies. Phineas still stood ready to call Miriam ambitious. Hester still wore borrowed sweetness like pearls, but Miriam had entered the moment as a woman whose name had been stolen, and stood now as a woman whose heart had answered freely. Arthur touched nothing more than the air between them. I will remember this, he said, not as a claim. As what? As a vow I must earn after the hall, not one that excuses me before it. Miriam picked up the true note and the false pledge. Her hands were steady now. Then come with me. Beside, he asked. She looked at him, and for the first time that day she smiled fully. Beside. Together they turned toward the double doors. The voices in the hall sharpened as a footman pulled them wider. Miriam saw Lady Drusilla pause in mid-sentence. She saw Hester's smile fix. She saw Phineas straighten, ready to finish the story he believed he owned. Miriam stepped forward first, the recovered pledge card in her hand, Arthur at her side, and the truth close enough at last to be heard. The subscription hall had been dressed to make virtue look inevitable. White cloth covered the long table where the forged pledge had first appeared. Vases of hothouse lilies stood between the arms boxes. Fresh candles burned beneath the painted banner for convalescent soldiers' widows. And every chair had been placed as if order could sanctify deceit. When Miriam Ellersby entered, the room turned toward her with the same swift hunger it had shown on the day her name was stolen. Only this time, she did not stand alone before it. Arthur Valehurst stood at her side, close enough for solidarity, not close enough to claim her voice before she used it. Aunt Mercy took her place near Mr. Osric Bell, whose document case rested open at his feet. Behind him, half hidden by a pillar, the frightened clerk from the storage room sat with his hat crushed between his hands. Two widows had been given chairs near the rear, not on display, but present. Miriam saw Mary Eddowes clasping her work-worn fingers in her lap, and Margaret Ellis staring at the floor as if courage were something one must not look at directly. Lady Drusilla Larkwell stood at the head of the hall in black silk, the perfect mourning patroness, the perfect charitable tyrant. Lady Hester shone beside her in blue ribbons and pearls. Phineas waited near the subscription table, smiling as if the room had already chosen him over truth. "My friends," Lady Drusilla began, "we gather to renew confidence after weeks of distressing confusion." Phineas stepped forward before she could continue, and to settle, with kindness, a matter that has been most painful to all concerned. Miss Ellersby's sacrifice has been misunderstood. Her new position under His Grace's protection need not divide old friends. Indeed, Lady Hester and I hope soon to announce our own happy understanding, proving there is no bitterness where Christian acceptance prevails. A soft stir of approval moved through the room. Miriam let it spend itself. Then she walked to the table and placed the copied pledge card upon the white cloth. Beside it, she laid her true thank you note, the pinholed subscription cards, the marked coin memorandum from Mr. Bell, 2 widow statements, and the clerk's written confession. The small papers looked fragile against all that silk and candlelight. They had nearly been enough to bury her. They would be enough to answer. "I was first brought into this room as a sentence someone else had written," Miriam said, her voice carried without strain. "Today I will begin with the handwriting." Lady Hester gave a bright little laugh. "Must we endure another lesson in stationery?" "Yes," Miriam said, "because your family nearly ruined women with it." The hall went still. Arthur did not speak. He looked at Miriam as if every word she chose had the authority of a bell. She lifted the thank you note. "This is my true hand, written 3 months ago to thank Lady Drusilla for placing my aunt upon the pension list. This," she touched the copied pledge, "is the false hand used to declare that I freely offered myself as companion, comfort, and wife to the Duke of Brackenholt." Phineas sighed. "Miriam, you don't help yourself by reviving humiliation." "No," she said, "I help the truth." She pointed to the final letter of her surname. "My true signature turns inward. The forged one turns out because the forger copied shape without understanding habit. Mr. Bell has examined both. Mr. Bell rose. I have. The pledge signature shows the hesitation of a traced hand. The true note was recovered from Lady Drusilla's committee storage, where it had been kept with blank pledge cards. Lady Drusilla's face did not change. A clerk's disorder is hardly conspiracy. Miriam lifted the next card. Then let us discuss order. These subscription cards are punctured with needle marks. 3 holes mark names praised publicly. 2 mark payments deferred. 1 marks names copied again for later use. The pattern appears across cards tied to widows who were named in speeches but did not receive the full sums announced. A patroness murmured, "Needle marks." Miriam removed her mother's tiny needle from the cracked forget-me-not case in her reticule and passed it through 3 holes in the cards. The alignment was exact. The marks are not from binding. They were made before the cards were displayed. They allowed someone to sort generosity into performance and theft. Hester's smile tightened. How imaginative. You've always been clever with little domestic things. Little domestic things fed this charity's lies, Miriam said. You should have feared them sooner. Mr. Bell opened his memorandum. The coins found wrapped in embroidered lawn during the alms box inspection bear tally scratches used by the Larkwell household steward. The packet was not counted before the inspection. No neutral witness saw it inside the box before the room was arranged. Arthur then spoke, his damaged voice low but carrying with ducal force. And the seal on the original pledge is not Brackenholt's. It is Larkwell black mourning wax. My name was used without authority, as Miss Ellersby's was used without consent. Lady Drusilla lifted her chin. His Grace has been misled by a young woman whose ambition is now apparent. She was jilted. She found a higher title. She chose outrage because gratitude did not suit her. Miriam turned to Phineas. If I was ambitious, my lord, why did you need to forge my willingness? The question struck him before he found his expression. His mouth opened, then closed. Hester stepped in quickly. Because you gave willingness privately and denied it publicly. Then tell the room how the cards were sorted. Hester blinked. What? Miriam held up 3 subscription cards. Mary Eddowes, Margaret Ellis, Martha Elkin. Which's name was pinned with 3 holes, not 2. Hester's patience broke for half a breath. Mary Eddowes was 3. Margaret was 2 because the supplement was delayed. Any clerk could have told you that. Silence opened beneath her words. The clerk made a small sound and covered his face. Mr. Bell rose again. That arrangement does not appear on any public account. It appears only in the sorting method described by the clerk and visible on the cards. Lady Hester has just confirmed knowledge of a private marking system. Hester went white. I was told after. By whom? Miriam asked. Hester looked at her mother. Lady Drusilla did not look back. That was answer enough for half the room. Mary Eddowes stood slowly at the rear. I never received the full supplement, she said, her voice shaking. A maid came for another signature, said it was for the committee's neatness. Margaret Ellis stood beside her. The same maid came to me, Hester whispered. They were paid to say this. Arthur's cane struck once against the floor. Be careful. It was not a shout. It needed no volume. Hester fell silent. Lady Drusilla reached for dignity as if it were another fan. These are administrative irregularities at most. I cannot oversee every maid, clerk, and coin. But you can threaten a widow's pension when her niece refuses a forged marriage pledge, Miriam said. You can call theft confusion and coercion charity. You can turn a woman's gratitude into consent and a widow's hunger into applause. The room had changed. Not fully kind, Society rarely became kind in one breath, but certainty was leaving it. Donors shifted away from Lady Drusilla. One clergyman removed his spectacles and would not meet her eyes. Phineas stared at the table, the handsome shape of his face emptied of useful charm. Arthur stepped forward only after Miriam had finished. From this day, Brackenholt withdraws every guinea of patronage from Lady Drusilla Larkwell's committee. Mr. Bell will establish a new board for the Widows' Fund, with accounts reviewed quarterly and 2 widows seated as advisers. Any donor wishing honest administration may apply to him before leaving this room. Lady Drusilla made one last attempt. You would destroy my good name for hers. Arthur looked at Miriam, then back at the room. No, she has restored her own name. You destroyed yours by requiring a forged one. The words finished what the evidence had begun. Phineas tried to leave, but a creditor near the door touched his sleeve with sudden interest. Hester sat down as if her knees had forgotten society. Lady Drusilla remained standing, proud and defeated, surrounded by lilies that now smelled too sweet. Arthur turned to Miriam and offered his hand. He did not take hers. He waited before them all until she had placed the final card upon the table and closed the needle case with its cracked hinge still holding. Only then did she put her gloved hand in his. A murmur rose, but it did not sound like the first day's applauses. It sounded like recognition arriving late and ashamed. Arthur faced the room with Miriam beside him. Miss Ellersby, he said, and his voice softened enough that the hall had to lean toward it. Will you marry me now that no one here has the power to make the answer useful to them? Miriam looked at the table where her stolen name lay exposed, then at the man who had learned to stand beside it without owning it. Yes, she said, not because they traded me, because I choose you. Several weeks after the subscription hall fell silent around Miriam's answer, Dunmarsh Chapel opened its doors to a morning so clear that even the old stones seemed willing to be forgiven. London had not become gentle, but it had become cautious. Lady Drusilla Larkwell's committee was dissolved before the month ended, not with the grand confession society pretended to admire, but through withdrawn patronesses, shuttered subscription books, and donors discovering how quickly virtue cooled when auditors arrived. Mr. Osric Bell began civil proceedings over redirected funds, and his notices, written with merciless politeness, travelled farther than any gossip sheet. The widow's supplements were corrected first. Mary Eddowes received the arrears owed to her before the new board held its opening meeting. Margaret Ellis came to Dunmarsh with her statement properly witnessed and left with money in her purse and disbelief in her eyes. 2 widows were seated as advisers to the Brackenholt-supported fund, and when an elderly patroness objected that such women might not understand administration, Miriam sent back one sentence in her own hand. They understand the cost of failure. Lady Hester Larkwell was sent north to relatives in Northumberland under the tender phrased of extended visiting, which meant every drawing room understood she had been removed before she could do further damage. Phineas lost Hester's engagement before it was announced, and then lost creditor patience with remarkable speed. His handsome sorrow, once so useful beside mantles, could not pay accounts. Lady Drusilla retained her title, her house, and enough pride to survive upon, but her invitations thinned until only those too indebted or too dull to notice scandal crossed her threshold. Miriam did not ask whether they regretted what they had done. Regret belonged to God and sleepless nights. Consequence belonged to the living. On the morning she married Arthur Valehurst, she wore ivory muslin without borrowed pearls, and carried no bouquet grander than a small cluster of forget-me-nots gathered from the chapel grass. Aunt Mercy wept openly and denied it to anyone foolish enough to mention tears. Mrs. Vale arranged the veil with a precision that almost concealed emotion. Mr. Bell stood as witness, with the solemn look of a man determined not to smile in church and failing at the corners of his mouth. Arthur waited near the altar, dark coat severe against the whitewashed wall, cane beside him, his scar visible because he had not chosen a collar high enough to hide it. Miriam saw that at once. He would not enter their marriage disguised as an easier man for society's comfort. When she came down the short aisle, he did not look triumphant. He looked grateful and grave and astonished by the mercy of being chosen freely. The vows were plain, old, and binding. Miriam spoke hers clearly. Arthur's voice roughened on the promise to cherish, but did not break, when the vicar pronounced them husband and wife. No great applause burst forth, no ballroom erupted, no patroness claimed to have predicted it. The chapel held only a softer sound, Aunt Mercy's breath, Mrs. Vale's handkerchief, the rooks beyond the churchyard, and Arthur whispering, "My Duchess," as if the word were not a title placed upon her, but an honor he meant to spend his life deserving. Miriam looked at him. "My husband," she answered, and felt the title settle not as rescue, but as choice. Later, in the morning room prepared for her at Dunmarsh Hall, sunlight fell across a desk that had never belonged to Lady Drusilla, Phineas, Gossip, or Fear. The first charter of the new Widows' Patronage Board lay open upon it, signed Miriam Ellersby, Duchess of Brackenholt, in a hand no one had traced, borrowed, softened, or stolen. Beside it rested her mother's forget-me, not needle case. The enamel flowers were still faded. The hinge remained cracked from the day Phineas had tried to stop her from speaking. Inside, wrapped in a square of plain white silk, lay a broken piece of black wax from the forged pledge card, kept after Mr. Bell had finished his formal copies. She had not kept the fragment as grief. She had kept it as evidence that a stolen name could be recovered, and that proof, once faced, need not remain shame. Arthur entered without haste, pausing at the open door until she turned. Marriage had not taught him to presume. That small courtesy moved her more than any jeweled gift could have done. "May I come in?" he asked. Miriam smiled. "You are asking permission to enter your own morning room?" "No," he said. "Yours." She held out her hand. He crossed to her and took it, bending to press a kiss against her gloved knuckles with the same restraint that had first taught her the difference between being claimed and being cherished. The tenderness of it spread through her quietly. "I love the woman who made truth gentler and stronger than pity," he said. The words were low, almost private enough for the furniture to keep. Miriam turned her hand so her fingers could close around his. "And I love the man who gave my name back to me, then waited until I gave him my heart." His eyes softened. "The case," he said, looking toward the desk. "Shall I have the hinge repaired?" Miriam picked up the little enamel box. It opened with a faint catch, uneven but faithful. "No, no, it held when I needed it." Arthur touched the air near the cracked hinge, not the case itself, until she placed it in his palm. "Then we will not make it pretend it was never damaged." "No," she said. "We will let it tell the truth gently." He returned it to the desk beside the charter. Together they looked at the strange small arrangement. New ink, old enamel, broken wax, and a name that belonged to its writer at last. Beyond the window, the chapel courtyard had filled quietly. Not with fashionable guests, hungry for display, but with estate children, widows, servants, tenants, and a few county neighbours who had learned that Brackenholt charity now came with accounts one could inspect. Along the path from the chapel gate, children had planted forget-me-nots in uneven rows, some upright, some tilted, all determined. Mary Eddowes's eldest daughter knelt in the dirt with great seriousness, while Mrs. Vale tried and failed to keep her gloves clean. Aunt Mercy waved from a bench beneath the yew, laughing at something Mr. Bell had said. "They planted them this morning," Arthur said. "Mrs. Vale said the rows are not straight." "Are you troubled?" "Not in the least. Straight rows are overrated by those who have never been uprooted." Miriam leaned into him, just enough for his arm to come around her when she allowed it. The embrace was quiet, married, and unobserved by any but the old room and the sunlight. For a moment, neither moved. They had crossed humiliation, forged consent, accusation, fear, apology, public reckoning, and the perilous distance between gratitude and love. What remained was not spectacle. It was peace with work inside it. Arthur drew back first, only far enough to offer his arm, and Miriam placed her hand upon it, as she had once done before Mayfair's watching windows. This time there was no test in the gesture, no scandal waiting at the foot of the steps, no room deciding what her answer meant. They walked out together into the chapel courtyard. The widows curtsied, the children stared at the new Duchess with open curiosity, and Aunt Mercy dabbed at her eyes without pretending otherwise. Arthur kept his pace matched to Miriam's, cane sounding softly on the stone path. Near the gate, Miriam paused beside the smallest clump of forget-me-nots. Their blue faces turned toward the sun, despite the roughness of the soil. She touched the needle case in her reticule, felt the cracked hinge beneath silk, and thought of the black seal locked safely inside it, no longer powerful, no longer feared. Arthur covered her hand with his for one brief, public moment, then waited until she turned her palm upward and chose to lace her fingers through his. The gesture was small. The whole courtyard saw it. Miriam did not lower her eyes. Once, society had applauded because it believed she had been sacrificed. Now she stood beside the Duke it had called rotting, with flowers growing from the ground they had both refused to abandon, and understood that becoming Duchess had not saved her from being traded. Choosing love, truth, and her own name had done that.